Hey everybody, welcome to the Pro Wrestling Musings podcast, the place where you can say hello to our little friend, if your little friend is pro wrestling statistics. I am Griff from GA, and joining me today, two men who have already been on the podcast before. It's Dan and, of course, the Baron of Brawling, the Duke of Duking It Out, the Monarch of Mayhem and Madness in pro wrestling. It is only the creator of Pro Wrestling Musings himself. It is Craig, back again for the first time in what seems like a long time, probably not that long. We got some Dynamite to talk about, as well as a big match over in Stardom, which we don't always get to cover, but I'm excited to be able to talk about that. Let's start, though, with AEW Dynamite. These shows, it's been well documented. It's been a weird time for Dynamite ever since they were moved to Friday for the NBA playoffs. So that mini era is coming to an end for them, and of course they're gearing up for the return of fans and everything else that we discussed last week on the podcast. So this is one of the last non-Wednesday Dynamites that we're going to see, and it's certainly divided opinion, so we will definitely get into that as we go on. But we will start, as you know, where all good things start, and that is at the beginning. And the first match of this Dynamite was one of the most divisive, I think, on the show, and that is, of course, Jake Hager versus Wardlow in the MMA cage match. This is a match that I personally enjoyed, but I will turn it over first to Craig, because I know that we're going to have three different opinions on how this match actually went down. So, Craig, as a whole here, AEW's first foray into this kind of new style of wrestling, this new presentation, what did you think about this one?
I don't really know. How's that for a start? This was a very odd match. I liked it. It was different. I'm not an MMA guy, so I think that might have helped. It has been made fun of online. I think a lot of that was directed at Wardlow's striking ability, which at times didn't look great. Gifts of that like Superman punch thing that he did off the side of the cage, which I thought was fine. I wasn't against that.
Yeah, I liked it.
Those have been kind of like used mockingly. But yeah, I quite liked it. It didn't overstay its welcome. Wardlow looked great. It was always likely that Hager was going to win. Can hardly see Bellator being very happy about him losing his undefeated MMA record in a wrestling promotion. So it was always likely that was going to be the case. Statistically speaking, Wardlow got most of the shine in this match. 50 strikes is quite a total in what was essentially just over a 9-minute match. He outdid... I'm trying to stop saying M in podcasts. We need some kind of like zap button. So Wardlow... Wardlow outdid him for strikes, 50 to 23. 4 of those were knockdowns compared to 0 from Hager. 5 grapples used by Wardlow. I did like the kind of wrestling grapples layered into it. I thought that worked quite well. However, where Hager outdid Wardlow was the submissions. Over a minute submission total for Hager, 64 seconds compared to 0 from Wardlow. So they've managed to keep Wardlow strong and didn't, make it unbelievable by having Jake Hager lose his MMA record to completely untrained wrestler Wardlow.
Yeah, it's a really good point. The strike downs was what was most interesting to me. I think that when you get into the subtle storytelling, we always, as wrestling fans, we talk about how do you lose a match but keep a guy strong. And the conventional wisdom has been, well, you just have the winner cheat somehow. You have the loser get a visual pinfall or something like that. That's been the conventional way to keep a loser of the match strong. But I think what AEW continues to show us, and this match is a good example, that you can make the loser strong just by having him be strong during a match. So Wardlow loses clean, but this isn't a situation where I'm coming out of this saying, well, I don't want to see these two fight again, or Wardlow looks weak, because he really doesn't. It's just about, first of all, how they built it up. Jake Hager being the undefeated MMA superstar they keep calling him, and then, Wardlow just being Wardlow. So obviously his look helps in that. He's never going to look weak just because of how he looks. But this match, I think, this is not the last time this is going to happen, I think, during this show, where I'm going to find myself in a very small category of people, because I am at the intersection in the Venn diagram of people who watch MMA and people who like this match. that seemed to be that cross section is very small, but I seem to be right in there because I did like the presentation of this match. I liked that they went very MMA with it. The only thing that I didn't love was at the very beginning where they did the referee checks and the pat downs and everything. Because in kayfabe, if wrestling is real, why don't we do that for pro wrestling? You know, because it's all safety related. So why would we do it for MMA and not for pro wrestling? That's the only thing that kind of, because I'm a nerd, that I really noticed. But other than that, I did like it. Wardlow's work striking could be better. That's definitely fair, but he hasn't had a lot of matches in his career, and I think this is his third singles match in AEW, like only a handful that he's had. So that could definitely be better. That's fair enough. But the match itself was entertaining. I think them working within the rounds was really good. That was something that is always challenging. We've seen it with the Grand Championship and Impact where they had a round system and some wrestlers work with that better than others. I think Hager, because of his MMA experience, does know what he's doing in that regard. I liked the story that Wardlow has to go into this kind of wrestling background in order to get the upper hand. I did like that. The Hurricane Rana, obviously it looked good. Whether or not it belongs in a kind of MMA style match, I'm okay with that because everything's worked anyway. So I kind of know what I'm getting coming in. But the most important thing to me, and maybe Dan will be able to shed some light on this as well, because I think we talked about this before the match coming in. The most important thing was that this match didn't make pro wrestling look like a work. You know, an issue when you get into presentations like this is they say, they kind of go too far into the direction of MMA is real fighting. Like pro wrestling, these guys are pro wrestlers, but now they're doing mixed martial arts, and that's real. You know, that's and so I'm just glad that we didn't have Taz yelling, "That's a shoot" all the time during this match. I think they did a really good job of presenting this match well while not burying pro wrestling and saying, "Oh, these guys are real fighters now because they're in a cage instead of a four-sided ring." That to me was the biggest triumph of this match. So everyone comes out looking good, in my opinion. Dan, I know we had conversations about that. So from your perspective, what did you think about this opening contest?
I thought they pitched it absolutely brilliantly. I wasn't expecting a huge amount out of this. I'll be honest, and again, like Craig, I'm not an MMA guy at all, so I do always worry, just as you were saying there, when they start to blur these lines between real fighting and fake fighting, as people see it. It's a very dangerous line to go down. But I genuinely thought they pitched it superbly. I really enjoyed that first round, which was sort of a mix of the technical grappling side, and then as the stats show, like when Wardlow, basically when he punched him, he was the one who was getting the rub. He was the strongest one there. And then, but it was that move to the more MMA side that Hager has the experience in that got him the win. That those 64 seconds of submission were the thing that wore Wardlow down. Mm-hmm. So I just thought they really pitched it very well, and it worked very well for both guys. As you said, I don't think either guy comes out looking weak at all. They're 1-1 now in terms of their matches, so we get to go again, presumably at some point, which I think is probably where people wanted it to go to a certain extent. And yeah, I thought they did a really good job in something that I was very worried about before, and I was particularly worried actually when they opened the show with it, because that's the other thing I was thinking, because obviously Dynamite often opens with these 20-minute absolute bangers where people are flying everywhere. Mm-hmm. So actually having an MMA fight where they actually had the first 5 minutes of people effectively grappling, you did wonder, is that going to turn people off? But from my perspective, and I'm saying this as someone who doesn't even like MMA particularly, or doesn't watch MMA, I thought that it was superb.
That's a really good point. We talked about this last week as well, that AEW does like that typical 20-minute, 15 to 20-minute. Lots of times it's a tag team match. Doesn't have to be, but a lot of times it is, where it is a lot of spots and very athletic and very high paced. But last week they did something different where they had Christian Cage open the show, and that was really good. And now they have this open the show and something that's very different. So I agree with you. I think this is a deviation from what we're used to seeing from AEW in these opening matches. But it sounds like, at least for the three of us, that it worked.
They did Moxley and Nagata as well a few weeks back, which is kind of different from that. Yeah, so maybe they're starting to experiment a little bit. The other thing that I thought was really good about this is they had all the Bellator footage. So they were able to show Jake Hager winning the Bellator matches and winning those Bellator matches with that what did they call it? The head and arm triangle choke thing, which he's been using as his wrestling finisher too, which I thought kind of really helps the presentation of Jake Hager's character.
Yeah, I agree with that. And it really does add legitimacy to the head and arm triangle, at least from people from our perspective, where we know wrestling's a work, the MMA stuff that he does is a shoot. Obviously in kayfabe, it's just a continuity thing. He uses it there, so he might as well use it here. But from our perspective, it just lends it a little bit of legitimacy that this isn't just a random finisher that they made up for him, that this is an actual thing he does. And so it just it immerses you even that much more into it. So I think it worked on two levels in that way. I want to talk about the broader angle here because this isn't the only Inner Circle Pinnacle related thing that we saw on the show. We had a video package a little later on featuring FTR and Proud and Powerful, which I personally really enjoyed. I thought that was great. All four of those guys are just excellent. And so it definitely seems as though we are getting the breakouts into the individual matches. And it's further supported by MJF coming out after this match, the MMA cage match, coming out and attacking Chris Jericho, punching out Dean Malenko. So there was a whole brawl after this. That brawl, as did many other things on the show, also divided opinion in terms of what people thought about it. It certainly seems as though the angle here, we're going towards the breakout feuds that are happening from Pinnacle and Inner Circle. So, Craig, I want to ask you, the entire point of this all is to get us excited for these matches coming up between all of these different members of these two groups. So, when you take the MMA cage match, the angle following the MMA cage match, and then the video package later on, are you more excited for all these matches that we're presumably going to see over the next month of all these special Dynamite events?
So, the really snarky, smarky voice in my head just went, do you know what I was really excited for? Blood and Guts. which does rather underline that kind of complaint that although they're trying to do something different, they took the really compelling match, put it first, which I agree with the idea that has diminished it a lot, actually. I'm into the matches that are coming up. I'm really, really into the match that you highlighted there, the tag team match. I think that's wonderful with both those two teams. And I'm really intrigued by Sammy Guevara versus MJF. Less interested in, Sean Spears is fine, struggling to find him compelling, and really struggling to find Chris Jericho compelling as well. Do not like him as a face. So, yeah, mixed bag. I do, and it almost seems boring to say it now, but I do think it was a huge mistake putting that Blood and Guts match first. It had such an aura about it just because of how long we'd all been waiting for it. Do your Stadium Stampede match, then do these matches, and eventually we have to go to Blood and Guts because, things have escalated that far. Instead, they put Blood and Guts first. They left the cage. They did the silly thing, which, was unfortunate. But I don't know. I just feel that they've diminished Blood and Guts, which was perhaps the only thing that you could almost say the Blood and Guts match had grown in anticipation because of the pandemic itself.
Mm-hmm. I definitely agree with you in the sense of the Blood and Guts match had this aura around it, and that's a great word to use for it. I think, and I've said on the podcast before, this is complete speculation on my part, but I think something happened in the scheduling of AEW that they found out about maybe that they're going to get preempted by the NBA, or maybe they had to put off touring, or whatever the case may be. I think something happened in the scheduling that made them do this weird. Just because there's things about the scheduling of this feud that is very odd that they don't usually do. But again, that's just pure speculation on my part. I will say
I have heard that I've heard that said elsewhere, which is very possibly the case. I think it's just that Blood and Guts match had just such an aura, and it's such a shame that it feels diminished.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I will say,
sorry, I cut you off.
No, not at all. I think if we're gonna say that this is entirely intentional from AEW, I think the reason for that may have been a rare miscalculation from AEW when it comes to understanding their fans. We were dumping glowing praise on them when they had Jungle Boy win the Casino Battle Royale over Christian, and it was just this incredible booking decision because they had this foresight to understand what the fans wanted to see at the time. So War Games may have been a rare miscalculation, or Blood and Guts rather, in that AEW may have believed that there wasn't going to be a single wrestler that could get over out of that Blood and Guts match. And so they wanted to end with all these individual feuds because there are specific wrestlers that they want to get over out of this feud, which ends up, if that's the case, it ends up being a mistake in booking because there are individuals who really got over in that Blood and Guts match. Sammy Guevara obviously being probably the chief one, but MJF being the one who throws Jericho off the cage. And had the stipulation been, loser disbands or something like that, had it been a feud ender, that probably would have been a bigger moment, so MJF would have gotten over out of that. So it's possible that AEW just didn't believe they could get individuals over in that match, and so that's why they're ending with this, because they do want maybe Wardlow to go over. They want either FTR or Proud and Powerful to be a legitimate tag team championship challenger after all this is done. So that might be the reason that they did things this way. I guess I'm looking at it in the very short term. All these matches I am excited for. Shawn Spears I have really liked. I've liked his work during this feud. I'm not sure if I am more excited for his match with Guevara than I am with Guevara's match with MJF, because I'm really excited for that one. But in terms of the individual matches we're getting, we're going to get a rubber match between Hager and Wardlow, so that's going to have a stipulation attached to it, I assume. So AEW doesn't do stipulations that often. So I'm excited to see what they do with that. All these individual matches I think are fun. But in the broader sense of what does this story give you, it does feel a little disjointed. It feels like things are a little out of place here for what they did. Dan, again, the point of all this is to make us excited for these matches. And in the short term, there's a lot of matches here that look good on paper, but obviously, like Craig and I have both said, in the long term, there's some disjointed storytelling going on here. So is there any way that AEW at this point could kind of parlay these two things and make the larger Pinnacle versus Inner Circle story into something that would be more compelling for you to watch?
Yeah, so I completely agree. They've got things around the wrong way, if that's because they were forced into it or the bad booking. I completely agree either way. I wonder if they're going to have to pivot now, because I imagine they were still building towards MJF versus Jericho as the sort of the end of this feud. But they seem to be doing now. It feels like MJF versus Sammy Guevara is going to be that end game. Mm-hmm. So I actually wonder if we get MJF go over Jericho soon, and then we actually get sort of Sammy Guevara as that almost final boss of the Inner Circle, which obviously was never going to be the plan. And I'm not quite sure where that does leave Shawn Spears. He is the one who sort of could potentially miss out on the other side there. I wonder if they'll maybe the fact that they had Spears and Jericho as the sort of the side guys in the MMA fight. I wonder if actually they'll move those two into feuding to allow it to be more MJF versus Sammy Guevara, because I think that seems to be where the fans want to see the match. I think it would be a better match, and it's one of those stories that one of the few that AEW have where they could weave that for years and years to come, I think we'd all love to see them sort of go at it repeatedly, to be honest. But also that tag match as well just looks just mouthwatering. I can't actually remember if have they faced each other at all on AEW. I'm not sure.
No, not in AEW. Maybe they have at some point, but not at AEW.
Yeah. But I mean, that match feels like it will be superb and an amazing contrast of styles, and I absolutely loved that video they did. The sort of both from the hard background, but different hard backgrounds. It was exciting. I feel like Proud and Powerful building up to something big at that New York show will be that'll be a huge moment, and if they are able to book that properly, I think it will be superb for them, and they deserve that, because I think they're probably, of all these amazing tag teams in AEW, they're the one that perhaps feel like they haven't had the shine that their talent deserves so far, and I think that it might well be building to that huge moment in New York.
That I absolutely agree with that. That would be an incredible thing to witness, and this story between Proud and Powerful and FTR, like you said, where they both have this very hard life growing up, and they have all these, terrible things that have happened to them, but in two completely different ways. You have this kind of rural southern background for FTR, and then you have the inner city streets background of Proud and Powerful. They contrast so well, and these two teams are telling the story, and what really makes it work is you have this underlying respect between both teams. But I'm sure we've all been there as people, that you have someone that that you respect on a base level. They have a similar background to you. They've been through similar things, but because of the choices they've made, after following all that, you almost hate them more. And that seems to be what's going on between FTR and Proud and Powerful. And to me, that's really effective. It is a really personal thing.
And I think they were going that way with Hager and Wardlow as well at the end of that match. Like the two of them were, there was an element of respect before the brawl broke out.
Yep.
And again, I think that's going to be part of that longer term story where these teams realize that it's MJF who's the one who they actually all hate, and he's the one who actually ends up sort of on the bad side of this. But yeah, there's certainly a lot of intriguing stuff they can do out of this. But we have also said that previously with this storyline, and as I said, it's not necessarily gone there yet. So sort of trusting the process a bit with this one, and trusting the fact that there's a huge amount of talent involved. And FTR versus Proud and Powerful, that will be a superb match. Even if they didn't build it at all, to be honest, it would be fantastic.
Yeah, if they had it next week after this one video, I'd be happy with that.
Yeah, exactly.
The next match on this card, I really enjoyed, and I think Craig will have a lot to say about this, given some of the opinions that I've seen him have over one of the men in this match, and this is, of course, the handicap match. Speaking of stipulations, I said that AEW doesn't do it very much, so they got a second one here with Darby Allin versus Scorpio Sky and Ethan Page. I have really enjoyed the work of Scorpio and Page. I think these guys are excellent. Ethan Page specifically has been fantastic, in my opinion. And this match here was really a case study of how you do a good handicap match, I think. Because speaking of keeping guys strong, they kept Darby strong. They also beat him because it's a 2-on-1, just the math doesn't work out. But it was a tremendous showing for Darby, and I think the stats really back this one up, that Darby Allin comes out of this looking great, but they've done it in a way that Scorpio Sky and Ethan Page are not buried because they got beat by one guy. And so this to me really worked on a lot of levels. But Craig, you were impressed by Darby Allin specifically in this match. So looking at this thing as a whole, what was it about Darby Allin that really stood out to you here?
Darby Allin is just the guy as far as the AEW's building of their own people is. He's been absolutely fantastic at everything that he's done. He's compelling, he's athletic, he thinks differently. You can see that he thinks differently in the way that he does things. And a handicap match is really difficult to do. It's one of those things that the WWE love to do. They love to throw people in handicap matches. They love to build scenarios where it seems like the obstacles to overcome are impossible to do so, and then they manage to do so anyway. Survivor Series matches you often see ended up being like 4-on-1 at the end, and then the one somehow triumphs, winning from number one in the Royal Rumble. Yeah, it should happen. It's a wonderful story, but it should only happen once, twice, maybe 3 times now. I think it's happened like 5 times if you include number 2 in it. Then they've got handicap matches as well in WWE, people win them more often than they should. The worst example I can think of recently, sorry, this has turned into WWE rant, but there's a lot of material for it.
I think we're all okay with that.
The last War Games match that I watched, Candice LeRae and Io Shirai won. Was it them two that won? I can't even remember. No, Candice LeRae and Rhea Ripley beat like four of the top heels in what ended up being a 4-on-2 handicap match, and somehow they managed to win. It was the match that Dakota Kai turned on.
That's right, turned on Tegan Nox.
The Welsh, yes, Tegan Nox, yeah, and two of them won against the four top heel women in the. So it's all that kind of ridiculous things. Darby Allin should never have beaten Paige and Sky here, and he didn't. And as you said, he was made to look strong. He was using cable ties at one point. He did have pinfalls, like visual pinfalls. He hit somebody with the the coffin drop. I think it was maybe even Paige. It was pretty much over. Somebody had to break it up. It looked like he was going for one again, and he was knocked off the top. It was great. And in terms of match offense, it won't feel like this, but Darby Allin had 49% of the match offense. So he was given his shine. He lost the match. He looked like he took an absolute beating because he sold it oh so well, as Darby Allin always does. And now the story can keep going. Presumably now we move towards Allin taking on Paige, maybe Sky first. That would be interesting. Mm-hmm. But yeah, you're going to get some of that, wide-eyed Ethan Page kind of aggression, violence towards Darby Allin, probably one-on-one sometime soon. One of those four on the road shows, perhaps.
Yeah, which I would love to see. I think AEW's done a great job of bringing up the history between those two and really making that part of the kayfabe storyline. One thing that I also want to ask you, Craig, we had this discussion on the podcast. We had it on Twitter. We've had it a lot a few weeks ago, or maybe it was a couple months ago now, where Darby Allin during a TNT championship defense, I think it was against 10 maybe, that he got out of a submission by raking the eyes, and so he causes this foul, and that's how he ends up winning the match. That was something that... Jungle Boy, that's right. Thank you. Oh, that's right. He got out of the snare trap by raking the eyes, and that was the foul, and that's how he won the match. So that was something that you had an issue with for babyface Darby Allin doing something like that and then going on to win the match. So in this particular instance, he ties Ethan Page's feet together with the zip tie and almost won the match because of that. That coffin drop that you mentioned, I believe, was to Scorpio Sky, and Ethan Page was able to stand up with his feet still tied together and yank him out of the ring. So I just want to ask you, and I'm not calling you out or anything like that. I genuinely want to know the difference between why you didn't like the raking the eyes on Jungle Boy and why you did like the zip tie around the feet in this match.
Well, now that I've been called out on this issue,
I just said I wasn't calling you out. I'm genuinely curious.
He also did this in a match against Brian Cage. He took off his belt and tied Brian Cage's feet together. I didn't like it in that match either. But I believe in that match, Team Taz were getting involved, and presumably they were, which probably makes it fair enough. The reason I didn't like it against Jungle Boy is because Jungle Boy was a pure babyface in that match. Jungle Boy wasn't breaking the rules, whereas Darby Allin was. So you can make an argument for, well, he had Team Taz ganging up on him. If they're playing dirty, isn't he a fool not to play dirty in return? Yeah, fair enough. Against Jungle Boy, how I read that was Jungle Boy had him beat. He had him in the snare trap for the second time. He applied it differently in a way that suggested that it was over for Darby Allin unless Darby Allin broke the rules. That I really didn't like that. Whereas here, when he's 2-on-1, if Ethan Page and Scorpio Sky had wrestled this match 2-on-1 and they'd never broken the rules and they were kind of mocking Darby Allin and, that's all they were doing, I would have an issue with Darby Allin breaking the rules in that scenario. However, the fact of the matter is Ethan Page and Scorpio Sky were breaking the rules at every opportunity. Darby Allin's 2-on-1 against them. They're breaking the rules. He's already at a disadvantage. Still, they need to break the rules to get even more of a disadvantage.
Yeah.
In that scenario, I think it is a babyface move to give it back a little bit. The problem with the Jungle Boy one was Jungle Boy wrestled a fair match, seemed to have Darby Allin beat, and the only way Darby Allin didn't lose his title was by cheating, which I thought was a flawed story because of the dynamic.
That's fair enough, especially because when you look at this in a 12-minute match where Sky and Page had a 2-on-1, they still committed 4 fouls during this whole thing, which I definitely agree with you. You're telling a story that even when they have the advantage, they still have to break the rules. And I also agree that sometimes babyfaces do have to play dirty at times. This is an old trope. I mean, when you look at, like, Ric Flair, for example, would have babyfaces breaking the rules against him, but it just works because Ric Flair breaks every rule all the time. And so to kind of give that back to him in that way ends up being a really effective story that you can kind of... the babyface looks like the good guy for breaking the rules just because he's giving it back to the heel. And so in this case, I agree with you. It did work on that level because Sky and Page were breaking the rules, even though they had this huge advantage to begin with. So that explanation is good enough for me.
My issue in the Allin Jungle Boy match was to do with the refereeing more than the fact that Darby Allin actually did that. If you're choosing to have that Darby Allin be that shade of grey, cool. I'm really not for you're either a babyface or a heel. I don't think it needs to be like that. I felt like the refereeing, you need to build in some kind of nuance because, like, then you get into the situation they're in New Japan where you've got a guy like Taichi who will have his hands on the opponent's neck at the ropes. He's choking the guy. Red Shoes counts to 4. He lets go, smiles, does it again, lets go, smiles, does it again, and it keeps going and going and going. And then the babyface, let's say it's somebody that doesn't break the rules, Kota Ibushi, will just continue to wrestle the match in the rules. So Taichi is breaking the rules, getting himself a massive advantage over Kota Ibushi. Referee doesn't do anything about it. Kota Ibushi will obviously see that referee's doing nothing about it and then just won't do it in return, if you know what I mean, which isn't so much a babyface, but like unintelligent. Like, why are you letting this guy continuously break the rules and hurt you, but you're not going to return because it's the rules, even though you're not going to get disqualified? If that makes sense.
That absolutely does. And when it comes to babyface intelligence, we will talk about that in a little bit. With the aforementioned Jungle Boy, we'll definitely get to that. But I would be remiss if I didn't also ask Dan about this match. When you look at this whole thing, I think Craig and I both thought that this was a really effective way to get Darby Allin over, make him look strong again in defeat without having to do all kinds of, and it would actually work this time if you had a bunch of shenanigans from the heel perspective. And in this case, they kind of did. Even though it's technically legal, I think, for Ethan Page to pull Darby Allin out of the ring during a pinfall. Did you count that as a foul, Craig? I think that's legal.
I don't think I counted that as a foul, no, because it's really hard in tag team matches to, a lot of things are fouls technically that I don't think I count as fouls. Even just when you're in the ring and you knock somebody else off the apron, I think the referee gestures as if that's a foul. When somebody comes in hot and they knock down the guy in the ring and then they go and knock down the guy on the outside for good measure. The referees are wave their arms a bit, but I don't know.
Can you foul someone whilst your legs are tied together?
Can you foul someone while being fouled?
Fouled, yeah. And also on the stats, I was thinking, Darby Allin made very, very few tags I saw, and no double team moves, which was a very, very poor effort from him.
That's a real tactical mistake.
Yeah, he's made an error there. But no, I really enjoyed it.
To be fair, I've done Darby Allin a disservice because he did make one tag, but I didn't count it.
Oh, that's true. He did tag himself at one point.
He did, yes. Yeah. But no, I really enjoyed this. Darby Allin's almost the most enjoyable person to watch get beaten up in wrestling at the moment, and I say that as someone who likes him. He's like, he sells it so well, and because actually I was genuinely surprised when I saw the stats on this one, because it felt like an absolute decimation.
Yeah.
The way that it was presented, but actually, almost half and half in terms of the actual match offense. But yeah, I completely agree with what both of you guys have said. It protected Darby, it made him look strong, but Page and Sky were the ones who came out on top. They still look like excellent heels, and there's a story to move on to. And I thought the other powerful thing with this was I was worried they were going to do some sort of silly Sting shenanigans here. Like that he does come in and when he's been told not to and all of that sort of thing that, again, we probably would have seen if it happened in WWE. And they steered away from that, and it made it feel a lot more important. So I don't know where they go with that in terms of Sting going forwards. But yeah, it made Darby Allin feel like Darby Allin again rather than the guy who comes out with Sting, which has been a bit of a problem, I think, certainly post him losing the TNT title. So, yeah, I thought this worked really well. And I think it was at this point in the Dynamite I was thinking, I don't understand why I've seen lots of criticism online, because both of these matches have been excellent.
Well, I'm sure we'll get to that going forward. But your point is well taken about Sting. There was a lot of concern about whether or not Sting would get involved, and I do agree that this isn't a match that necessarily needed that. And it does show that there's a lot of respect between Darby Allin and Sting, because I think had Sting come out, then it would have looked like too paternalistic from Sting's perspective, because you go, I know that Darby Allin can't handle this by himself, so I'm going to be here just in case, kind of thing. And it really shows that there's a lot of respect between Sting and Darby, that Sting just respects what Darby had to tell him. And Darby said, I don't want you anywhere near here. And Sting said, I think this is a poor decision, but whatever. You're a grown-ass man. You do what you want to do. And that paints Sting, I think, in a very positive light, because he doesn't look like, that kind of, overbearing older brother, father figure that I don't think he's looked like, but he's kind of verged onto that. He's coming out, he's with Darby too much, and you express that concern as well. The one final point I want to make about this match is really where I think the big offense stat that Craig has started to integrate into these really makes a difference. Because when you look at Allen or Page and Sky rather, they have the advantage in strikes and grapples, and they like we were all saying, it certainly seems as though they were just decimating Allen this whole time. But the big offense, which gets rid of the traditional, just the normal strikes and only counts strike downs, grapples, dives, and everything else, that's where that's almost dead even, 15 to 13 in the favor of Page and Sky. And that, again, is just subtle things that they can do in the match that still keeps Darby Allin strong, where he looked like he was actually able to compete with these guys on a certain level. And he makes his comeback, and it's this kind of gradual comeback from him as he works his way into the match. And then, he makes his real comeback, and he almost wins the match there. So this was a good way to do a handicap match, in my opinion. We might as well move on to what we were talking about earlier in terms of keeping baby faces intelligent, because I really want to talk about this. The Jungle Boy and Kenny Omega feud now, this kind of mini feud that may or may not culminate after next Saturday. We'll have to see where they go with that. This is something that I have really, really enjoyed. And I'm a Kenny Omega mark. He's one of my favorites of all time, so maybe that does play a factor in it. So I'm excited to hear from you guys. But this whole thing here, Kenny Omega looks like such a dork during this whole feud, and that's part of what I love about it, because he's one of the guys that he doesn't need to look like a super intelligent, like just 40 chess playing heel, you know what I mean? Because he's so good in the ring. So it makes sense. He can be thwarted at every turn, but when it comes down to it, just no one can beat him in the ring. And that's what makes him so hateable, is that he should be getting beat all the time, but he's not, because he's so good. That's the story that I've interpreted. And then on top of that, you're layering in Jungle Boy, who just is intelligent. He's just smart. Like, he understands what's going on. He knows what's happening. And even the time when they can get the better of him in this particular segment where Nakazawa hits him in the back with the laptop, even then he is thinking and he knows what to do. And so the culmination of this, where Kenny Omega pushes Nakazawa off the cart as they're trying to get away, I loved that. That was so good, because he's done that to Nakazawa before. So I really enjoyed that bit. I'm really liking this feud. I love Jungle Boy. I love Kenny Omega. So for you guys, though, I know that not everyone has liked this as much as I have. So Dan, we'll start with you. How is this feud working for you?
I've enjoyed it a lot. I like Jungle Boy's approach in this, of being the sort of quiet, not taking any nonsense, but not like a big badass heel or a big badass babyface. Even he's just like, yeah, you're an arsehole, so I'm going to treat you like an arsehole. That sort of, and I quite like that approach. It's again, I think you could argue that it was stupid of him to stand there and have the fight with Kenny, but at the same time, you wouldn't have your babyface walk off and be a coward in that situation.
Right.
So I think that made absolute sense. And yeah, I did previously say that Darby Allin is the funniest person to see beaten up in AEW, but actually Michael Nakazawa is starting to get that as well, because him being pushed off the cart was a highlight of the week, certainly for me. But I mean, I couldn't be looking forward to this match anymore. But part of that is just because they're such brilliant wrestlers, as you said earlier, Kenny. And I completely agree, actually. Like, it's an interesting line they're doing where Kenny is so good in the ring, and yet he's still being this little arsehole, basically, who's trying to cheat. When we all know, actually, from his in-ring performances, he shouldn't really need to do that. But that's sort of not the mentality he's going with. It will be I think no doubt it'll be a superb match. And I've enjoyed the build to it. 3-week build, effectively, they've given it. And it makes me, everything they've done has made me want to watch the match more. And that's ultimately what we're going for.
Yep, absolutely. I think this is why it was such a brilliant decision from AEW. I think this is why they needed Kenny Omega to not be a world champion for a while, because if this was the character he was going with when people first started asking for it, and people were first starting to ask to see him turn heel very early in AEW, and had they done that, then essentially they'd be going with the premise that everyone watching AEW is familiar with Kenny Omega's work. And that is not a safe assumption, because for a lot of people, including myself actually, AEW was the introduction to Kenny Omega's work. And then we had to go back and see everything that he's done. And so now retroactively, I know how great of a wrestler he is, maybe the greatest that ever lived, but I wouldn't have known that had AEW not introduced me to him in that way. And so if they had done this immediately and just said, well, look at his matches with Okada, look at everything he's done, he's the greatest of all time. Like, yeah, but I haven't seen it. The fact that in AEW he had...
It feels like some kind of wrestling website should do some kind of series about that.
It does.
That
it does
idea.
feel like that.
Definitely.
I wish that there was someone out there that did that. If you're not on YouTube, go check out the YouTube channel. Maybe we have the answer in that regard. But I mean, as great as those matches were, the fact that in AEW he's had great matches with Pac and Hangman, and I mean, obviously the tag match with the Young Bucks is one of my favorite matches of all time, and then tag match with FTR. The fact that he's had all of these banger matches in AEW, that's how they can tell the story, even for people that aren't familiar with his work in New Japan, that look, this guy really is the greatest wrestler in the world, but he's still doing all this kind of stuff. That's, I think, what makes it really effective. That being said, though, I've seen some criticism from people that Kenny Omega has yet to have, that one match, that legacy-defining match. And obviously, his matches with Okada, which you can read and watch about on ProWrestlingMusings.com and on the Pro Wrestling Musings YouTube channel, that comes to mind. People saying that's a legacy-defining match, so I'm waiting for that in AEW. Craig, where do you stand on all this? With Kenny Omega as world champion, do you need him to have this Okada-level match, or is his title reign really working for you with or without that, 78-star match or whatever?
Yeah, so I'm one of those people. I'm Kenny Omega singles star kind of enthusiast. I love like everything he did in New Japan. It was utterly fantastic, and it hasn't reached those heights in AEW, even though he's been champion for a while now. Yeah, the Rey Fenix match was great. Some of that match against John Moxley was great, but what I really like about wrestling is the really competitive singles matches. And for me, AEW have not hit the heights in the kind of the main event singles kind of matches that I would like. I'm really excited about the signing of Andrade because I think part of the issue that Kenny Omega has in AEW is he doesn't really have too many of those guys that can reach those heights. Like we're not going to really hit those Okada heights very often, if ever at all again. Mm-hmm. But in New Japan, there's Ibushi, there's Tanahashi, there's Naito, Ishii, Shingo. All these guys can have these sort of 4.75, 4.8 star, like thinking grapple kind of ratings kind of matches. AEW less so. Maybe Hangman Page could get there with Kenny Omega. Maybe Rey Fenix could. Maybe I like Andrade's chances. Him and Gargano had that wonderful, wonderful match. Mm-hmm. So yeah, maybe Kenny Omega will still get there. I think there's something there with Hangman. I think there's a better match for Kenny and Moxley to have. I wonder if that'll come round again. But yeah, in terms of your match of the year candidates, the AEW isn't getting anywhere near there except with that tag team match. People will point to the Cody Dustin match. It's really good. It's one of AEW's best. It's not that match doesn't really, in my opinion, and the way that these kind of ratings go, it doesn't quite compare with the kind of stuff that you would be seeing in Japan or in fact NXT a few years ago.
It's probably their best singles match, isn't it? The Cody v Dustin is probably their most well respected or reviewed singles match.
I think it is rated the highest out of their single matches.
And as you said, I love that match. I think it was brilliant. Mm. Don't get me wrong, but you're right. It wouldn't be on the same level as the Kenny. Well, again, is it fair to compare other matches to Kenny versus Okada? They were literally perfect. I think from start to finish. Yeah. But yeah, they haven't had that singles match yet that I think really defines them as a sort of a work rate, good wrestling company in that sense. It's come in the tag team matches. And it is interesting that I feel like Kenny needs that one match, as you said, in AEW to almost stave off that criticism. Even though I'm not sure it's necessarily a fair comparison all the time because New Japan isn't booked week to week, for example. Like Kenny has to wrestle these matches with the storyline in the same way that, not in the same way that New Japan does a lot of the time. It's a very different approach. But yeah, I'm also hanging my hat on that sort of Kenny versus Andrade match as the match that, gets them up to that 5-star for everyone else that we haven't quite seen in the singles era yet in AEW, and certainly not this year. That's it does feel like they are slightly behind on that at the moment.
I would say that in terms of the fact that this year they haven't really seen those heights, I think the pandemic had a whole lot to do with that. And so they don't have the fans. They've had to tell their stories a little differently. So to me, this last year is kind of a wash when it comes to trying to put on fantastic matches. That being said, though, I am of the mind that Kenny Omega and Rey Fenix, that is almost as good a singles match as you could really see, unless you're talking about, you bring up the question of, is it fair to compare anything to Omega Okada? And in my opinion, it's not, because you are literally talking about two guys who have a legitimate argument to being the greatest of all time. I mean, they're intelligent people, extremely more intelligent than me, that could go to their graves saying that either one of these two guys is the greatest wrestler that ever lived. And so it's not fair to compare anything unless you're also dealing with a match with two of the greatest ever, which is why, to me, really the only matches that you could put on that level would be like Flair and Steamboat. It has to be of that caliber. And so falling short of that, Omega and Phoenix, in my opinion, is as good of a singles match as you can really see, and certainly one of the best singles matches that you could ever see on free television. You know, I mean, normally you got to pay $50 for that.
Yeah, and I think that's the
So
difference.
can I?
The best matches that Kenny's had so far. I was going to say, best matches Kenny has had as a singles competitor have probably been on Dynamite rather than on pay-per-view.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
So the Pac one, I think the Iron Man, that was on Dynamite, wasn't it?
Yes, it was, and it also tremendous.
Yeah, absolutely superb match, and the Phoenix match was brilliant. It's certainly not saying that that Kenny's not brilliant, but yeah, it's that things on pay-per-view they are elevated, and I think that's what he hasn't had yet in terms of a singles match. But I think the Hangman match will be that match. I think that's where we will get that.
And that's my frustration. Those pay-per-view singles matches. Just so I use Grapple a lot because I don't like the Dave Meltzer thing. It's not like he's very valuable and for kind of comparing matches throughout history, but at the end of the day, he's one guy.
Right.
So that Cody Dustin match that we spoke about got 4.54 on Grapple, and like the top end of Grapple is a 4.89, which is like the Omega matches. The next singles match is Kenny Omega versus Pac. Funnily enough, Kenny Omega. So 4.44 for that one, and then that Rey Fenix match, which I believe Dave Meltzer gave a 5-star.
Did he really?
And that got I think so. That got 4.
Yeah, he did. Yes, because I saw that.
Wow.
Yeah, so that got 4.43. But like, I'm not comparing these matches even just to that rivalry. It's more to just like what's the best kind of thing in the world this year. And even in the pandemic this year, with like so much going on, New Japan's better matches are still to me light years ahead. As like they've had a 4.8 this year, 4.61, 4.61, 4.61, 4.59. That's just this year. Whereas before we were talking about like the entirety of AEW. So like I think that in a pay-per-view main event, John Moxley, Kenny Omega, I don't know, I would like a bit more. I think they should be getting closer to New Japan. And I'm missing something, but I don't see why Kenny Omega and John Moxley, I don't know, I don't think that that's too unreasonable.
No, both of their matches were slightly hamstrung by sort of gimmick stuff, weren't they? Because obviously the first one ended with a dodgy finish, and then with Callis and the microphone and stuff, and the second one was obviously hamstrung by a complete failed explosion.
Right, but that still being said, the exploding barbed wire death match was in my opinion, up until that finish, was probably the best exploding barbed wire death match ever. I mean, just in terms of the story they were telling during that match.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, agreed.
And it does get forgotten though. Yeah.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because that the finish does taint it, and that whole match was designed basically to tell the story that Kenny wants to be the greatest of all time, and to be the greatest of all time, you have to excel in every match. And had the finish happened the way it was supposed to, we probably would be regarding that as one of the greatest exploding barbed wire death matches ever, and Kenny Omega would be a part of it, and so that would continue that whole story. I don't want to argue against you, Craig, because I'm not necessarily disagreeing with you.
So you're agreeing. Wonderful. Let's move on.
Well, I want to offer another perspective from someone who got interested in the non-WWE side of wrestling because of AEW. So my introduction to places like New Japan happened really because of AEW, because I was put onto this new style of wrestling, this other non-WWE style of wrestling. And so from that, what I think New Japan just has a much different style from AEW in terms of what are fans going to be looking for. So for people who love the 45-minute matches in New Japan, those matches would just they work for you on a level that 20-minute matches never could. You know what I mean? And obviously that's a general statement, but that seems to be the case. So for me, the best 45-minute matches are the best matches ever. You know, and look at Omega Okada for evidence of that. However, that being said, the 45-minute matches that don't work, they really don't work. At least for, I would say, at least Western fans. They don't work for a lot of people. And I think AEW they're hyper aware of that, because obviously all of their management came from New Japan, right? I mean, the Bucks and Kenny and Cody, all these guys came from New Japan. All of them know what structuring a New Japan match is like, and what doing a 45, 50, 60, 70-minute match actually looks like, and how to make that great. Obviously, just ask Kenny Omega. He knows what he's doing in that regard. So all these guys understand this. And I think the reason that AEW doesn't want to do it is because they're so hyper aware of what happens if they do a 45-minute match that isn't good. And so that they're almost scared to do it. Like they don't want to get into that. The 30-minute Iron Man match with Pac, you know, when you listen to people talk about that, it's like they were so... You're talking about two of the best in the world, and they were still hyper aware of what it means to do a 30-minute match and how they had to structure it and what they had to do. And obviously it worked. But I think from AEW's perspective, what they're giving us is the pinnacle of what these 20-minute matches can really be. There's only so much storytelling. There's only so many spots that you can put into a 20-minute match. And AEW, in my opinion, does it better than any other company really does. So in order to take that next step, what I think everyone who's saying this is asking for, and again, I'm not necessarily disagreeing, is that 45-minute match that just for every minute you are engrossed, you are interested, there's things happening, there's drama, all of these things that we connect with the Omega Okada matches. And obviously they're not the only ones to do it, but that's what comes to mind. And so I think that's what people are really clamoring for. And I assume that at some point AEW is probably going to deliver that. I assume Kenny Omega is going to be the one to do it. But I think from their perspective, they're hesitant to venture into that territory because they know what happens if they get it wrong. And in my opinion, that's the reason why I don't watch New Japan all the time, because for as phenomenal as their best matches are, for example, Okada and Ospreay from Wrestle Kingdom 15 that I loved, for as great as that was, there were other 45-minute matches on the card that I didn't love, and because they're so long, I'm just sitting there like, God, can we get this over with? And the thing about AEW is their bad matches are 10 minutes, so we're done. We're out of here.
Yeah. I really agree. My least favorite wrestling watching experience of all time was sitting doing stats for Evil versus Naito last summer.
I was about to mention that because I knew it was your favorite match, Craig. But...
Evil used more fouls than legal offense. It was utterly
and for 45 minutes
stupid.
As well, wasn't it?
For 45 minutes. I remember sitting there for like 30 minutes, like, just stop. Just let's all go home and just stop this. Like he would just like grab Red Shoes and throw him into the turnbuckle so he could start like using illegal offense, and then Red Shoes would get up and he would like then just do something else to Red Shoes so he could continue breaking the rules that Red Shoes wasn't even going to disqualify him for. It was the biggest pile. No, I do agree. I think Omega's also hurt at the moment. I keep hearing about that.
Yeah, there's a lot going on apparently.
Yeah.
Which if you watch his matches with Okada, kind of makes a lot of sense. Like, how is this guy still wrestling? I don't know. I really don't. But
yeah, no, I do agree. I really don't want the long matches all the time. I suppose more maybe, I don't know. You would maybe hope for 2 or 3, 4.5 plus star matches a year. I think is perhaps more the balance that I would find, especially if the pay-per-views are quarterly.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, isn't it? You've only got 4 pay-per-views a year on AEW, so that's where you perhaps should be seeing something really out of the ordinary. And I suppose again, the last year the things they've been doing out of the ordinary have been sort of gimmick matches, whether that's Stadium Stampede, Blood and Guts, the exploding barbed wire stuff.
Yeah.
I wonder if when the fans are back, that's when we perhaps will get that 45-minute absolute banger that we saw, that New Japan style when it's good. We don't want an evil style match. That would not be good. But I think that is the one thing actually that in many ways that AEW hasn't quite achieved yet. And so what if they haven't? It's 2 years in. They're growing. It's fine that they've still got a chance to do that. I think that Hangman Omega might be the biggest opportunity to do that.
I have a suspicion that eventually Kenny Omega is going to hit another gear as a character. And what it's going to be is there's going to be someone, and let's say Jungle Boy, for example. I say Jungle Boy because I really like him, and I'd love to see him really get the rub to be able to do this. Someone is going to outthink Kenny on every level. Like, Kenny's going to have all the cheating and all the interference and all of this, and the babyface is going to have an answer for every single one. And so Callis isn't going to be able to do what he's going to do, and the Elite gets beat up, and all of these things happen. And so it just becomes Kenny versus the babyface. And what we're taught to believe in wrestling is that when that happens, when all of the heel's dirty tactics get countered and the babyface survives it all, that the babyface is going to win. And so we're going to get to that moment, and then Kenny's just going to win anyway. Just on the ability of Kenny Omega, and that is going to be the entrance into kind of the final chapter of his story, that all of the cheating is going to fail, and yet Kenny Omega is still going to be champion because he's going to just go into that gear that only Kenny Omega possesses of being the greatest wrestler on earth, and that's going to be the final salvo. And at that point, that's where we can get, maybe it's going to be Hangman or could be Jungle Boy again. I mean, whoever that can put on that level of match with Kenny. And so maybe that'll be at Full Gear. I mean, I don't want to speculate about when that would actually happen, but I think it would have to be short, given the fact that Kenny is working hurt. But if he's willing to give like 2 months of everything he's got, or even 1 month, everything he's got into this, and then he loses and he can go away for a while until he's healthy again, and then he can come back and be whoever he wants to be. I have this kind of suspicion that maybe that's where we're headed with this, and I would love to see that, because I think the one thing that Kenny has yet to do in AEW, I agree with both of you, is put on the match that everyone's going to remember forever. I mean, I'm going to remember his match with Rey Fenix, but is that going to go into the annals of history the same way that some of Kenny's other matches have? That's debatable, but maybe a title match with Hangman, maybe that would go into that category. And so I feel like that's where this might be going.
Feels like we're being very greedy, aren't we? We're saying that it's rubbish that his 5-star matches only happen on Dynamite. We need something bigger than that. Come on, Kenny, sort it out. But
you make such a great point. Like this incredible match with Rey Fenix, like one of the best free TV matches of all time. We're like, yeah, but it only happened once. I mean, come on. All right, let's move on to another match that actually happened. Let's talk about let's talk about Brock Anderson's debut. How about that? This was obviously, all the jokes were about Tony Schiavone introducing Brock Anderson, and that was that's all very funny. But this kid can really go, in my opinion. I think he's great, and Cody led him through a good match. QT Marshall is just a solid pair of hands as a veteran. Aaron Solo, same deal. So this ended up being, I think, a really entertaining match. I liked a lot of the stuff that was going on here, and Brock looks strong. He didn't get to do a spine buster, which I'm kind of disappointed by, but QT did one, and it was really good looking, so that's fine with me. But yeah, I mean, nothing to say about this match. I thought it was a lot of fun. I thought that Cody and Brock, they did what they were supposed to do as baby faces. They did get more of the match offense than I would have hoped, but that's a common issue I have with any Cody Rhodes match, and I've said that for a long time now. But Brock Anderson himself, I thought, just looked really good. I thought this was a pretty good showcase for him, and I got nothing to say about it. Craig, what did you think here?
Yeah, it's always interesting seeing such a raw kind of prospect in the ring. I've got no problem with that. It's interesting. Like, how does he stack up against the other guys? How competent does he look? It's one of the flaws in the WWE NXT system. Like, they're all turned into the same wrestler by the time they make it to the main roster or even to NXT nowadays. So yeah, it was interesting. In terms of offense, they absolutely smashed QT and Solo. I really do like QT seems to have like a move stealer thing going on. Like the match against Cody a wee while ago, he was using the Crossroads, used like a tombstone in that match. He used the Spinebuster here, so that's quite a cool thing. I'd like to see that. Like if he was just this kind of leech that keeps using his opponent's different moves. I think that's a really cool gimmick. But yeah, big offense, 21-9 in favor of Cody and Brock. So yeah, it was decent for what it was. Don't have a huge amount else to say about it. Cody is in a weird place. I'm fascinated to see what happens with Cody once all the fans are back, and it's been a wee while, because I don't know if he'll get quite the same almost religious response as he used to get from the audience. I think there was some like smattering of boos during the ladder match. At whatever pay-per-view that was, when he came running back to the ring, I think there were some boos because they're like, oh no, he's going to win it, and we kind of want to see something else. So yeah, It's going to be interesting.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think Cody, and this is where the stats I think really come in handy. Cody is not booked poorly. We had long conversations about this after his match with Ogogo, and that was, I say this, and I'm the one that said it was a mistake for him to win. I think Ogogo should have won that match. But as a whole, real surprising, I know.
What's the do we need to take a stopwatch on that?
That it
quite a long way in.
Yeah, it's quite good.
No, you're right. Well, he wasn't on this show, so really the impressive part should be that I found a way to mention him at all. But in general,
only QT would find a way to mention him.
I know, right? I think the thing about Cody is he's not booked the same way that he wrestles. It's this very weird disconnect. He wrestles like a dominant wrestler, and that's been my criticism with him, is that he's a babyface, but he wrestles like he's a heel. And that's been a disconnect for me. However, the straight booking in terms of the wins and losses, I mean, he's booked strong, but not like a monster. Like pretty much every champion in AEW is booked stronger than Cody. And so even Cody as a champion wasn't booked as strong as other champions. And he's the only champion who's gotten squashed. I mean, think about every other title change that we've had are matches that are 20 minutes, sometimes 30 minutes in the case of the tag belts. All of these things are so long. And then Cody's match where he loses the title was 3 minutes. And so that his wins and losses don't really match up with how strong he's booked or how strong he looks in the ring, which has always been kind of a disconnect for me and a very weird one. So I agree with you, Craig. I'm curious to see the 5,000 in Daly's place, or however many there were, during his match with Ogogo and during all the build and everything. They were solidly cheering for him, but when you turn it over to 10 or 15,000 in all these different places that they're going, are they going to give him the same reaction? I don't know. I am curious to see what they do with that.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is it? They possibly going to have to give him another big story somewhere when the fans come back, because it feels like this one is. I think we said right at the start, this is a while since I've been on with Craig, but I'm pretty sure the last time I was on this podcast, we were talking about the start of this story, and that was a long time ago now, and it doesn't entirely feel like it's moved on a huge amount. I think the addition of Anderson has helped the story a bit, and the bit that I found really intriguing was the end of this match, where Cody was sort of off doing his own thing whilst Brock Anderson, not Brock Lesnar. I don't think it was Brock Lesnar, as far as I'm aware. Whilst he won the match, and the end was him and his dad celebrating without Cody really being there.
Right.
Obviously, they're setting him up as another person to potentially betray Cody in a battle. We're going to talk about Stardom later, but I think Cody and Mayu Iwatani in Stardom are probably the most betrayed people in the whole of wrestling at the moment. In terms of,
I thought that Cody's kind of going to the tunnel was his way of being seen to be giving Brock Anderson his time in the spotlight. Like, he won the match, I'm going to get out of the way so you have your time to celebrate. But I'm still going to stay at the top of the tunnel so that people can see me doing that.
Yes, and it's one of those things I suspect when they do this turn or whatever they do with this storyline at some point, they'll use it as a story hook to say, look, this is my first win and you didn't come back to celebrate with me. Even though, yeah, you're right. He would argue, I was letting you have your moments. It's one of those ones they can use further down the line.
Yeah.
Either way, to be honest.
Well, this is such a tricky thing about wrestling, is that when it comes to storytelling, we all want to see very subtle nods to all of these different things and these different character traits and everything. And I love that as much as anyone. The problem with wrestling, though, is if this is going to be the crux of a potential story. So let's say, Dan, that they do go this way, and Brock says, you didn't come out and celebrate with me. You've never cared about my involvement. You're using my father for your own gain, whatever else he wants to do. If this is a crucial part of the story, if no one noticed that this happened, then everyone will be like, well, where the hell did this come from? Like, if they never showed Cody and it was just Brock and his dad, then it would be kind of like, they'd be kind of retconning this thing in, you know what I'm saying? And so it's tough in wrestling because you want to have the subtle parts of the story, but at the same time, you need everyone to know what the story is. So you can't be too subtle about what you're doing, because then everyone will be like, well, what the hell's this story from? You've just kind of made it up out of whole cloth. And so wrestling fans are the same people that will then get on a company for saying, oh, you're just retconning all the stuff you did. And so I think in the case of showing Cody in the tunnel, I think they would have done that for anyone if that's going to be the ultimate end of the story. I think people are hypersensitive about what's going on with Cody specifically because of how strong he looks in the ring, how much he's been at the top of the card, and just the pervasive notion that Cody is booked to be really strong. And on one level that works, on another level it doesn't. And then I think also the story with Ogogo I think has made people just very, very hyper aware of where Cody is, how he's booked, what he looks like. For better or worse, I'm not saying that that's a bad thing or that that's undeserved or whatever. I'm just saying that I do think that that's part of this as well. Had this been someone else, I don't think this would be as big a deal as it is.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And he invites that. He likes these little subtle nods and all of that, doesn't it? That's part of his view on wrestling. I think he likes to put these things in there. So yeah, he's trying to cater for lots of different crowds, I think, at the same time. We joke about Ogogo earlier not being on the show, but where is Anthony Ogogo? Has he actually benefited from that interaction with Cody? Again, we talked about the stats of him not being booked to win so much. But I think, the big comparison is always with Cody and Triple H, which I think is very unfair. But Triple H is the guy who's lost the most at WrestleMania of anyone. And yet he's still able to bury people whilst doing that. So just the fact that you lose the matches doesn't necessarily mean, or you're booked to look weak, it doesn't mean you're not taking the limelight from other people. I don't think that's a fair comparison at all at the moment. I think he is still elevating people generally. But it does concern me that we haven't seen Anthony Ogogo properly this week. Was he on there last week? I can't. Was that He was just sort of there because QT mentioned him, didn't he?
Yeah.
He won the match. So yeah, it just worries me slightly that the right people aren't necessarily getting the rub from all of this. But yeah, maybe Brock Anderson is the one who will. And as you said right at the start of this, I thought he looked superb for someone who's never wrestled in front of a live crowd before, as far as I'm aware.
Yeah.
The other theory with Ogogo is that he's turning face. The QT thing with him, taking credit for Ogogo knocking out Cody is a sign that Ogogo will end up turning on QT because of that, which makes sense because when you look at how over Ogogo was, certainly on the internet, everybody loved him, the way that he was coming out and what he was speaking about and the way he was putting himself across. I would be surprised if they decided to turn him face. He's an incredibly likable guy.
I think
we'd all enjoy seeing him punch QT Marshall at some point. I think that would be one of those sort of things that they could stick on the banner of Dynamite, isn't it?
Yes.
Speaking as someone who was, I'm just gonna put this out there. I don't like doing this, but I was an Ogogo fan before all of you. So, and there is evidence on this podcast of me being an Ogogo fan before anyone else. But anyway, that being said, as big of a fan of him as I am, I don't necessarily know if I want to see him turn face just yet. And I don't know if he himself wants to turn face yet. I mean, it's hard to say. I think I am of the belief that his Twitter account is a 95% work. I think sometimes he'll put some shoot stuff on there, but almost anything that he tweets, any video he's in, any interview he does is almost entirely a work. And so he did put on his Twitter a few days ago that he said, "Stop calling me a babyface because I'm not. I'm a bad guy." And so whether that's a work shoot or a shoot work, I don't know. He kind of blurs the line in that regard. But as great as he is, and as good of a story as you could tell with him as a babyface, the reality is he has a lot more to give as a heel right now, in my opinion. And so if the idea is to turn him face, it feels a little quick, and it feels like an unforced error. It feels like they'd be giving away a lot of the heel stories they could tell with him because they rushed into this story with him and Cody that got away from the Nightmare Family versus the Factory. And obviously we talked about that story so much, and so we don't need to relitigate it here. But ultimately, I want to see more from Ogogo as a heel. And so I'm not necessarily saying a double turn or a turn for QT rather. But I think it would be cool if this was just basically Ogogo saying, "I'm going to go out on my own," because let's be real. The thing that he lacks at this point is match experience. But he doesn't lack anything as a character. And so normally you'd pair a guy with a manager because the guy can't talk and he needs some character. We saw it with Lance Archer. But Ogogo doesn't need that. He's already one of the best talkers in AEW right now. So if the story is get him away from QT but still keep him as a heel so he can just decimate QT, that would be a good story for me in terms of getting Ogogo over. What that does for Camarado, who's the other guy who might break out of this group, that I don't know. We'll have to see. And that's another booking mistake, in my opinion, that he didn't win that bull rope match with Dustin. But that's at this point, and we haven't seen Camarado really either after that.
Well, because he was actually at ringside during this match, but did nothing at all. He was actually in that end bit where Cody had gone off to a tunnel. Camarado was almost sort of hanging around, almost looking like he wasn't sure what he was supposed to do, which wasn't a good look, I don't think. But I know this is something we've talked about on here before with Rampage having that extra hour. I think was for you to have a few more televised squashes for Ogogo, for example, and really build him back up again at that stage. And probably same for someone like Camarado as well, actually, because with the best will in the world, he could go 24-0 on Dynamite on Dark Elevation, and people aren't going to necessarily know about it. And I think that will be a useful platform for someone like Ogogo. But yeah, it would be good to see both of those two guys get more out of all of this, because at the moment it still feels like the people who are getting the biggest rub are Cody and QT, and I'm not sure that was the point.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, maybe it will be Brock. I want to mention just real quick before we move on, my favorite part of this match was QT's Crossroads, which Brock turned into a DDT. I literally rewound and watched that like 5 times because I just have no idea how he did that. I mean, just the physics of the way his body moved does not seem to make sense to me. So, which is part of why I was so impressed with him. I think he looked smooth in terms of
he looks
Brock
like he's got one of the best DDTs in the business already. He seems to put that together. I was going to say to Craig earlier with the finisher stealing. I don't know what that does to your stats. Is it a finisher if you use someone else's finisher?
I would say yes.
No, it's not. It's no, because they never finish the matches when they steal other people's finishers.
Okay, all right. So let me ask you this though. I'm with you on that, but let me ask you this: Baron Corbin's Deep Six has never won a match ever against anyone at any level. Is that considered a finisher?
Absolutely not. No, that would be
all right.
Stupid.
Okay. So I'm just trying to. Even so, it doesn't necessarily have to be a named move. It has to be able to finish matches. That's the criteria?
Yeah, so it is whether or not it finishes matches. So, like, the easiest way of explaining it is Chris Jericho. 10 years ago, the Codebreaker would have been a finisher. It's not now because it generally doesn't really finish matches.
Gotcha.
Judas Effect is.
Yeah.
When you kind of dig deep into... So, the other one, John Moxley, when he does, like, the snap DDT... I wouldn't call that finisher, but when he does the elevated Death Rider paradigm shift version, that is a finisher. Huh. The other ones is like Okada. Okada has like 4 different versions of the Rainmaker.
Right.
But the version that finishes the match is his Ripcord version. So if he does like a snap one or his like discus lariat version, the commentators will say Rainmaker, but it never finishes the match, so it's not a finisher.
Right.
Also, Naito has a running version of the Destino. Kevin Kelly will scream Destino, and it never finishes, but the one where he properly rings the arm and hits the Destino does. So only that one is a finisher.
I was going to say, if you counted every Destino that Naito tries to do,
it would really throw off the numbers.
I was going to say, though, if you're talking about the Deep Six and Baron Corbin, I'm prepared to guess, and I haven't done the research on this, that Craig has not done a statistical analysis of a single Baron Corbin match in his time so far. So
okay, well that was the example that stood out to me in terms of a move that's named that's never won a match.
That's 100% correct.
Baron Corbin, he could probably hit me with a Deep Six, and I would still kick out. I mean, it doesn't matter. That move just it's probably in the Bible somewhere. The Deep Six is not allowed to finish a wrestling match. So that minor aside about how we do the stats here. Let's talk about. I think it's time to talk about the main event now. You know what? Actually, no. Let's talk about everything having to do with the women's division that we saw. This is the other kind of controversial thing that we got on this show. I personally have what I believe to be a very unpopular opinion about all this. So I will not talk about it until I hear from you guys first and see if we can dissuade me from the unpopular opinion that I'm going to have in a second. So this was... all the things that happened with the women on this show, a Jade Cargill promo, which is basically the same thing that she's been doing for months now. We had Julia Hart versus Penelope Ford, and then a Britt Baker promo, which Vicky Guerrero interrupted and then challenged her to a match. So we're going to get Vicky Guerrero and Nyla Rose versus Britt Baker and Reba. So that was everything having to do with all this. So I'll just leave this open and I'll turn it over to Craig first. Everything that we saw here, the match and the 2 promos, there's been a lot of criticism about this. Where do you fall on how all of this went down?
Yeah, this was really, really bad. Okay, Penelope Ford is great. Really like Penelope Ford. She's a fascinating character. Why she was on this, I don't really know. She's a heel. Are they building her up for a face turn to face Britt Baker? I don't know. Where's Hikaru Shida? Hikaru Shida cut off all her hair and puts like a tiny bit of glittery face paint on to try to change things up after she lost. why isn't Hikaru Shida going through some kind of breakdown at the moment? She should be on Dynamite destroying Julia Hart. That's who should have been on this match. Then you have maybe a twisted version of Hikaru Shida's character that a babyface is going to have to eventually beat in order to get to your heel champion. They've had Hikaru Shida on TV for a year. We all know who she is. We all know she's important. We all know she's a champion, or she was a champion. She's been wrestling on Dark. She's not even gone away. She's been wrestling on Dark. It's bizarre. Book Hikaru Shida, taking apart Julia Hart, have her take apart a couple more kind of lower to mid cards women, and then have Chris Statlander or Ty Conti beat her to get a big title match against Britt Baker. And stop booking Britt Baker in really dumb segments. Like, we all really like Britt Baker. We've all waited a long time for her to be legit and in the main event. And then she's done some weird stuff with Burgers and now some weird stuff with Vicky Guerrero. I was really, really kind of getting into the women's division again. They'd, tournament, bringing in some more of the Joshi wrestlers. Serena Deeb has been unreal, and it just feels like, I don't know, I really don't want the criticisms of AEW and their attitude towards women's wrestling to be true or to be as simple as a lot of people will say, but like it gets really hard to defend at times. And I think that as a male wrestling fan, it is your responsibility to notice your own, I want this company to be doing a good job with the women, and I want to believe that. So I do also need to feel like I need to check myself and actually be like, are you lying to yourself there? Are they really doing best by these guys? And it's that criticism, like, when do you think they speak about this division when they're sitting around the table going through Dynamite? Is it the first thing they talk about or the last thing they talk about? And a lot of people will suggest it's the last thing that they talk about because it seems a bit throwaway. And yeah, that I don't know, after the last couple of weeks, that is somewhat difficult to rebuff.
Dan, I'll turn it over to you. What are your thoughts on what we saw in this Dynamite concerning the women's division?
Yeah, I agree with Craig. It feels still, not still, because they did briefly look like they were moving in the right direction with this. It feels more like an afterthought again. I just, none of this week made a huge amount of sense. The Penelope Ford match with Julia Hart, fine, I understood that. To a certain extent, you're trying to get Julia Hart over a little bit. You're trying to bring Penelope Ford back onto television. And I actually thought they were going in the right direction with this. I thought when Miro came out, they're doing this to try and build Penelope Ford as the first babyface to go up against Britt Baker. But that entire match it was a build-up to a men's match. It didn't do anything for either Penelope Ford or Julia Hart, really. We're getting Pillman versus Miro, which is fine. That's a great match. But to have the only women's match on the card effectively as a build-up to a men's match is the sort of thing you can understand why people are criticizing it. Jade Cargill is doing the same thing week in, week out. I think she's superb. I think she will be brilliant. But I'm not sure where they're going with this because she can't fight Britt Baker, I don't think. I'm not sure who else she's lined up to fight. She's obviously just decimating people on Dark and Dark Elevation at the moment. But it's not entirely clear where that's all going. And then, the Britt Baker, Vicky Guerrero stuff, that's not going to be the match we see. I don't think we're going to see that tag match with those four involved. I think there's going to be something else. We had the chat earlier with Andrade with Jim Ross, and he talked about a surprise, and I wonder if that will factor into it. I think a lot of people talking, will it be Thea Trinidad, for example?
Imagine that. Wow.
But which would be amazing, and particularly when you could theoretically tie in some sort of Aleister Black, Tommy End story with all of that as well, who I know has been linked to AEW. We are therefore talking about hugely fantasy booking situations, whereas the match on the card is a tag match including Vicky Guerrero, and it's quite hard to look forward to that. And as Greg said, I'm not sure we've really seen very much good stuff from Britt Baker, who is the absolute star of that division, and they've elevated her to the champion to really underline the fact that she's a star, and we just haven't quite seen it yet. Like it's not been great. I was fine with the Burger stuff to a certain extent. That was, her being again sort of the arsehole heel. That's fine, and Nyla was the one who was going to be who broke it all up. But they've got a built-in storyline there where Nyla beat her in the tournament earlier this year. I think she also beat her presumably as champion at some point when Nyla was champion. There is a built-in storyline there built around wins and losses, which is a thing that AEW keep talking about being very important. It's very important in the men's division. It's very important in the tag division. Why are we not building the match around that for the women's division? Maybe they'll get there. As I said, I think there is something more to come in this. But we talk a lot of the time with AEW about trust the process. I'm not sure with the women's division that trust is justified at the moment, because it does often feel just not as well booked as the other divisions. So now you can give your controversial opinion, Chris.
So I will give my unpopular opinion. So I want to preface this by saying I thoroughly believe in the general phrase of never attribute to malice what can be attributed to ignorance. And in AEW's case, there's a theory that they just don't believe that women can get over. They don't believe that women can be as big draws as the men. I've seen that before. And my counter to that, I believe that AEW, not to say that they're ignorant or anything, but I think that when the company started, there was such a gap in who they had coming in for the men and who they had coming in for the women. For the men, what they started with was some of the greatest wrestlers of all time, right? They start, like Kenny Omega is the first big name that comes out, and he's possibly the greatest ever. Then you have the Young Bucks. Then you have Cody. And then you add Moxley. Like, you're literally adding legends into the men's division for AEW. And so they have so much to work with when it comes to these guys. They have established characters. They have established storylines. They have established wrestlers. All of these people that they can work with. For the women, they just didn't have that. And so what we're seeing is AEW starting from an A+ when it comes to their men's talent and then building from there. And for the women, they had to start from like a B or something. I mean, they're not bad. None of the women they brought in are bad. But they didn't bring in world-class talent.
They're not stars, are they?
Exactly.
They weren't stars. Yeah,
exactly. So AEW, for any of you who have played a wrestling booking game like TEW or JOW or something like that, then you'll know how difficult it is to build an entire division when you don't have any stars. It's incredibly difficult. And that's what AEW has done. And I think the criticism is not that they don't care about the women. It's that they haven't quite figured out how to build a division without having a ready-made star to build it around. Because that's what they did for the tag teams. Because think of the first tag team champions were SCU. But they had stars in that entire tournament, right? They had the Lucha Brothers, they had the Young Bucks, so they knew what they were doing. They had these people to work off of. And giving the belts to SCU was this huge moment because they had these stars ready-made that SCU could then go on and beat. And then the team that ends up beating SCU is not an established tag team, but two superstars that they get to put together, and then they get to have great matches against other already built stars. All of these things that could happen cannot happen for the women because they didn't have those kind of ready-built stars ready for them when they came in. So all of that being said, I actually I enjoy the prospect of this Vicky Guerrero tag match. I'm not joking. This is something that intrigues me because, first of all, this is a long trope in wrestling. Managers who can't wrestle that have to get in there and get beat up. Now, normally it's heel managers with baby faces. So that's a weird disconnect there because Britt Baker's a heel. But I think it's getting a ton of criticism because of the way that the women's division has been booked. If you remember a few months ago, Mark Sterling was supposed to get in the ring with Jon Moxley and everyone loved that. It's basically the same story. Now, that being said, Jon Moxley was a babyface. Britt Baker's a heel. So it's different in that regard. But that part of it is a long trope in wrestling that usually turns out to be pretty funny, if not a good match. It probably won't be a good match if Vicky Guerrero actually has to wrestle. But she probably won't. There's AEW has never done something like this. The Mark Sterling thing with Jon Moxley was a swerve from the beginning. So, and we always knew that was going to happen. So this Vicky Guerrero thing, it's probably a swerve. I don't know what they're going to do, but AEW as a company, as Dan alluded to, has built up that trust with us that they're going to do something. Now, does that extend to the women's division? I think personally, yes, because I don't think the issue for AEW when it comes to the women is the booking itself. I think the issue is they tried to book it like the men, but the men already had global superstars and the women did not. So that's why, if I start from that premise, that's why the things that happen with the women's division don't bother me as much, because I know that AEW, this is not where they're necessarily successful. Now, that being said, that doesn't mean that I can't and haven't criticized. I wish that Nyla Rose, first of all, was on this show. That's your world championship challenger. So she's got to be here, in my opinion. However, counter to that, Jungle Boy didn't have a match. Kenny Omega didn't have a match. There's parallels between the way they book the women and the men. The difference is, for the men, your world champions have been Chris Jericho, Jon Moxley, and Kenny Omega. Your world champions are three of the greatest wrestlers of this generation. The women's world champions have been Riho, Nyla Rose, Shida, and now Britt Baker. Now, you could say that Shida might be in that same conversation with Moxley and Jericho. I wouldn't necessarily agree. I mean, she's great, but is she on that level? To me, I don't think so. So they're doing the same things. It just doesn't work when you don't have global superstars. With Rampage coming up, there will be more time to be able to get more women on the show. Think about how many storylines exist for the men right now. There's so much stuff going on for them. So much so that their storylines bleed into when we have women's matches. Which actually, it does make sense. I mean, say what you want about that match setting up a Miro match. The reality is it does make sense for that to happen. Miro would be the kind of person to come out and taunt someone right after they've won a match about their husband who he brutalized a few weeks ago. So I think Rampage will give us more opportunities to see potential challengers for Britt Baker. And I think that ultimately this is a marathon, not a sprint. Britt Baker is the textbook definition of a wrestler who came into AEW with high expectations, and then she didn't meet them as a babyface. She did not get over as a babyface. And so they broke her character down all the way to building it back up again as a heel, and now she is probably the biggest star in the women's division, and in my opinion, the most over woman in AEW right now. That is AEW making stars from the ground up. They took Baker from being not over at all and have turned her into the biggest star for the women's division in the company. So it's not that they can't, and it's not that they won't. It's that it's a very slow process. And along the way, we're going to hit hurdles. But if at the end of the day, we are meant to build up women that can believably challenge Britt Baker, this does feel like a hurdle. And if they use this Vicky Guerrero match as an opportunity to bring in someone, maybe it is Tia Trinidad, and I hope it is, because I think she's great. As a wrestler, she's fine. As a character, she's great. If that's what it's going to be, then what we have is the match that everyone's going to be talking about, because that was the swerve. Tia Trinidad is the swerve that came in for Vicky Guerrero. So I have a much, much longer term view of the way that this is going, and I completely understand the criticism that this is getting now for the short term, but in the long term, this is still working for me. Britt Baker still works for me as a champion. And this story, Vicky Guerrero, I actually like. So the controversial opinion for me, I didn't hate any of this. And Julia Hart, by the way, I also really like. I think she's great. And she's 19. So think about all the time she has left in the business. So that's my controversial opinion. Didn't hate it. I'm excited for where this leaves us. But I also understand those of you who agree more with Dan and Craig, certainly.
I don't actually disagree with anything you said. My criticism is around, like, I do agree that the women's division can't really be on the same level as the other divisions at the moment, because that would be false. But I do believe that the women's division is better than how they treat it, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
like I would say they've got like a B,
there's more talent there.
B minus. Yeah, it's a B minus division, and they treat it like a C minus division. Sometimes it has been treated very well. Like a month ago, I don't know. It just.
Well, for example, it's not the first time this has happened with Penelope Ford.
Mm-hmm.
I don't
think.
Yeah. So she was. I think she had a really good match with Shida, didn't she, last year at some point?
Yeah, very.
That didn't go anywhere. Like, where's Tay Conti at the moment? She had a superb couple of weeks, and she's not anywhere now. It's those sorts of things that, like, I completely agree with you, Griff. They were starting from a completely different point with the women's division than any of their other divisions. They didn't have stars, but for example, have they put as much care into building up someone like Tay Conti as they have building up someone like Jungle Boy? I'm not sure they have. And those two were probably on, when arguably actually before AEW started, more people have known about Tay Conti than Jungle Boy. So I think there's certainly a fair criticism of some of that. And again, I've said this, I think last time I was on, that maybe Rampage gives them a bit more time to fill out some of these stories, give the women a bit more than, because again, they're dealing with the fact that they've got one title, whereas the men have got three, if you include the tag titles. So by nature, there's less time for them on TV. By the way, that the AEW book, maybe Rampage gives them a bit more time to do that and give them a bit more. But it's I think it's very easy to say they don't care about women, they're not doing anything. Like, none of the I think if that was the case, the women would be speaking out about it in AEW, and they're not doing that. But I think there should have been more progress than there has been, particularly where we were. If you think back to where we were after the Britt Baker Thunder Rosa match, it feels like we've gone back a bit from there, and that's disappointing. Yeah,
that's an absolutely fair criticism, both of you, in my opinion. Which is why I'm defending it to the extent that I don't think the women's booking has been like a travesty or something like that, but it's certainly not perfect. And I agree with you when it comes to building stars. They've done a ton to build up Jungle Boy, who was a relative unknown when he got into AEW and now is going to challenge for a world title. And so you have this entire buildup for him. So I would say that I think what it's evidence of is AEW, they know how to book stars, right? They know how to book their main event. And so the reason why we can elevate Jungle Boy is because we let stars do it. We let Kenny Omega do it. We let Christian Cage do it. There are stars that can help build Jungle Boy. There just isn't that in the women's division right now. So what took the men 2 years to accomplish, building Jungle Boy to a main event level or building Darby Allin to a main event level, courtesy of Cody and Brody Lee and guys like that. What took them 2 years, it might take the women 4 or 5 years. Now, you could argue that it should only take the women 3 years or something, and that's absolutely a legitimate argument. But I think that this is the one place where I think AEW has struggled when it comes to building stars without an established star to do it. And that's the position they found themselves in the women's division. So I think there's absolutely fair criticism. But all of what I said is to say that the prospect of this tag match is one that I actually personally am excited to see. I guess mostly because I'm expecting a swerve. So if they don't give us a swerve, then I guess we'll have to deal with that when we deal with it. But for me, expecting one, AEW tends to deliver on things like this. So I guess,
I'd tell you what, like, just in terms of pure sort of the more entertainment side of sports entertainment, then no, any interaction with Reba and Vicky Guerrero in the next couple of weeks will be entertaining. I don't think there's any doubts about that. I think everyone's mileage as to whether that's what they want to see or not will stretch to a certain extent.
I agree with that, yeah. Everyone's mileage varies on how much patience they have with that.
Exactly.
Okay, let's finally get on to the main event, because we still got this, and then obviously we got to talk about Stardom. So we talk about women who are real stars. We'll talk about that shortly. But this main event, I really enjoyed this. I mean, how could you not, given the men involved? Seeing the Good Brothers on AEW once again, I always like them. They're a team that I absolutely understand the criticism for on every level. People who criticize the Good Brothers, I understand every word of it. I personally like them, but I'm also a Bullet Club mark, so it makes a lot of sense why I would like them the way I do. But this main event I thought was just fantastic. Frankie Kazarian is working with a character right now that I think just it suits him so well, and all of the kind of biblical references that he's making and these super high-paced promos that he's doing and all this stuff. I think it just suits his character. It works for him, and the idea that he's going to be like he's the elite hunter, right? He's like this kind of bounty hunter that just works to beat up the elite. I love that story because it just works for him and the character that he is and what he's been through. And when it comes to when SCU broke up and everyone was saying, why didn't they get more time to tell this story? Why didn't they get more time in the aftermath and everything? This would be a good way to kind of go back and redo that in a way that now Frankie Kazarian himself gets more time for this story that he's doing, and we can kind of explore retroactively. It's not the best way to do it, but it is a way to do it. So, I mean, this match was great. I really, really, really enjoyed this. So, Craig, when it comes to main events, I think AEW has been doing really well. Really their entire existence, but specifically over the last few months, I think they've been putting on some really great main events, and this to me is one of them. So, what did you think about this?
Yeah, recently AEW has done a really good job of selling the prospect of trios matches. Like whenever they're on the cards, I'm really, really up for seeing it. They tend to be really, really good.
Oh, yeah.
In other companies, it tends to just be a way of getting people on TV, which is understandable. But like it feels like AEW are top of the mountain for tag team matches. Their tag team teams all have great double team moves. It looks like the next thing that's going to happen at AEW to build on top of that is trios, and you're going to see. I think you're going to see a title at some point, and then you're going to see trios pulling off really cool trios moves. That wasn't really as much the case in this match, except when I think the Good Brothers picked up Matt at one point and used his feet as a battering ram, which I suppose you could call a triple team rather than a double team, but it was kind of paled in comparison to the kind of triple teams that you sometimes see, what do you call them, Jurassic Express and Death Triangle pulling off. In terms of statistics, it was fairly even in terms of total offense because the Good Brothers and Matt got in so much strikes. However, in terms of big offense, it was 31 compared to 16 in favor of the babyface team. When have a look at the flow of offense type graph, the 3-minute periods. This will be on the website. You should be able to find it fairly straightforward. It's such a back and forth match. Like the faces start off hot, the heels have almost nothing, then that swaps the complete other way round and back and forth until you get to the end. So yeah, fast-paced, lots of action. AEW excel at this kind of match now. It's always great. So yeah, liked it.
Yeah, we talk every week. I said last week, and Ryan has agreed with me, and we've talked about this with Anthony before, and there's a general consensus, I think, among the Pro Wrestling Musings crew that in terms of the modern six-man tag, no one does it better than AEW. And a big reason why, Craig, I totally agree, is because they give stories to these matches. It's not just a way to put people on TV. It's an actual story that they're telling here. And so this joins the lineage of six-man tags that I have really enjoyed, and I think not coincidentally, they tend to feature members of the Lucha Brothers or other luchadors. So, because some of the best six-man tags that we've seen have been the Lucha Brothers and Laredo Kid, and they did them, and it's just absolutely excellent. Their matches against the Elite were phenomenal matches. So, I mean, more six-man tags.
The Young Bucks too. I think the Young Bucks excel at matches where there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of people flying around and combining things together. Mm-hmm. But yeah, you're absolutely right. That I think it was that trio that you mentioned there, Laredo Kids and the Lucha Brothers, when they took on the Young Bucks and Brandon Cutler.
Yep.
I think that was the like the week before the Elite got back together. That match was unreal.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. So this is, I didn't think that I'd be in a position of asking for more six-man tags, before AEW started, because, we come from watching places like WWE where that is what they do. And even New Japan, the six-man tags tend to be just to get people in front of crowds, and they tend to be very hit or miss in terms of match quality. But for AEW, I mean, the more six-man tags they give us, the better. And so the prospect of a potential trios title, if you had said it 2 years ago, and a lot of people did, and they mentioned the prospect of doing that because you have the background of people coming from Japan where they have the never open weight six-man tag, and people coming from Mexico where trios titles are very common. People 2 years ago were saying, no, I don't want a six-man tag title. But now at this point, if you said we were going to get a trios title, I'd be like, yeah, I mean, I'll take that yesterday. So Dan, I mean, Craig and I seem to really enjoy this match to put it lightly. But I've heard some criticism that the story here maybe didn't advance. The story of the Elite and Mox and Kingston and this whole thing that we're seeing maybe didn't advance in this match. So where do you come down on match quality versus long-term stories that are being advanced?
Well, actually, I don't agree with that criticism of this match, actually, because I think it did move the story forward. Again, what it was a team who worked together repeatedly, beating a team who are disparate. Well, three different factions they sort of come from. That's the thing. Like you've got sort of almost three different storylines from the Kaz Penta King side. They're all upset with the Bucks and the Elite for different reasons.
Right.
And actually the stat, I was just looking at the stats. So there's three double team moves from the Elite and only one from the other side. And it certainly felt like there was a lot more sort of individual skill on the Kaz Penta King side than the Elite side. Yeah. So I think they were sort of telling that story through that, and obviously you then get the outside interference as well to sort of to underline that as one team against this sort of disparate group of people who hate them for various different reasons. But I thought in ring, I thought it was superb. The other thing, just looking at the stats, the pure amount of work going in there. It was only a 14-minute match, and you've got we were talking about the big offense. It was 31 versus 16, and that's not including then the strikes, which were 53 and 77. So it's like there was so much going on in this match. It was almost like one of those matches we were talking about earlier, which would normally open Dynamite.
Right.
Everything going on, loads of different bits and pieces. Whether it's high flying aerial, Eddie Kingston just punching people, which I will always enjoy watching. I enjoyed it from start to finish, to be honest. I think perhaps the criticism is it was perhaps quite a limp ending in that the Elite just won and then walked off, and that was that. We didn't get a sort of post-match angle. But actually, I suspect a lot of the same people who have that criticism would also criticise the fact that there's too many post-match beatdowns and all this going on. So actually, it was actually perhaps quite a good thing just to see the Elite just win. Sweet.
Well, I think heels need clean wins every so often. Exactly. I mean, you want them to do the beat downs, and you want to, not to say this was clean because there was cheating, but in terms of you want to see the beat downs and all that kind of stuff. But every so often the heels just need to win and leave, because these are great wrestlers. I mean, say what you want, but the Good Brothers and Matt Jackson, these are really, really A-level wrestlers.
Yeah, absolutely. And so completely agree. Actually, I really enjoy seeing the Good Brothers on AEW. I think I saw today that they're due to head back to New Japan in some capacity in the next couple of months. So it'd be interesting to see whether we see them on AEW, because they're spreading themselves quite thin at that point if they're on 3 different shows.
I think that's strong. There's been a big
That's how it is. Okay.
They are booked
thing.
They're booked to be in a tournament, a tag team tournament on Strong, I think I saw. Which, interestingly enough, they're booked to be there, but FinJuice is not booked to be on that show, which is kind of interesting. If you follow New Japan at all, then the FinJuice may not be around for that much longer in New Japan. So I thought that was just a quick aside. But yeah, I mean, the Good Brothers, the prospect of seeing them on AEW, Impact, and New Japan in some capacity is very interesting. I mean, I think these guys are kind of, in a lot of ways, the trailblazers for this whole Forbidden Door thing that's going on.
Yeah,
I mean, they've done a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, the thing is, they're the ones who are the poster boys for working everywhere, aren't they? And it does feel right that they're the ones who are getting the most benefit out of this in many ways, that work anywhere they want and sort of are being booked as stars. Well, we haven't seen them in New Japan yet, but they are being booked as stars in both promotions at the moment in terms of Impact and AEW, and it's good to see. And I thought this week they really showed up in the ring. We haven't really seen them a huge amount in the ring in AEW. We've just seen them interfering and generally getting involved. But I thought, as a trio, I thought they were superb this week.
Yeah, I'm the only thing I'm disappointed by is that we didn't get to see a Carl Anderson spinebuster. He does the best spinebuster in the world, in my opinion. So every match he's in, I want to see him pull it out.
I think QT Marshall pulled rank that he got the spinebuster this week. So.
I mean, all right, in the match that involved Arn Anderson, then that's fair enough, I guess. But more KA spinebusters, the better. That's all I'm saying. But in terms of these guys, what's so interesting about them, I think this goes all the way back to when they did Talkin' Shopomania, and this whole, their goal, I think they kind of telegraphed this from the beginning, that they wanted to work everywhere. I mean, they said that from the moment they were released from WWE. They said, our goal is to work everywhere on Earth. And they said, we have freedom now to work our style where we want, do what we want to do. And I think they're really now taking advantage of that. And I think these guys, they should get credit for just kind of putting out there into the ether that once you've done the work to become big stars, you do have more control over your career now than you used to. And these guys, I think, are poster boys for that. And for some people, their characters don't work, and that's fair enough. But for those of us who their characters do work, they make tuning into all of these different programs a much more attractive proposition. I will tune in to Impact. I mean, I watch AEW every week regardless. But in terms of Impact, them and Kenny Omega being on that show turns my interest in Impact from zero, I'm not going to watch, to I'll probably watch if they're on. And New Japan Strong may be a similar prospect for a lot of people. So these guys deserve a lot of credit for introducing this idea that you can work multiple places and make it work. And it'll be okay. And so I'll give credit to these guys for being able to do that. Craig, though, I do want to ask you this, getting back to some of the numbers that we're seeing here. The thing that really jumps out to me is the discrepancy in the big offense. For a team that loses and only gets 46% of the total match offense, to basically outdo the Good Brothers and Matt Jackson 2-1 in the big offense category. How does that work from a match perspective? I mean, obviously all three of us really enjoyed this match. So why did it work to see the numbers look like that and yet have this team lose and also not get more than half of the total offense in that match?
So this is a pattern that has kind of come out of the Young Bucks turn. Before, Young Bucks matches were like offense laden. They had ridiculous stats for strikes, strike downs, grapples, dives, to the extent that they were always at the top of the charts that I put together. However, since they've turned, it's all been very character driven, lots of taunting, lots of fouls, Lots of simple strikes, but all the kind of big offense is gone. And I don't know if if the Good Brothers just kind of slotted into Matt Jackson's kind of template for that, or if they would have done that anywhere, or if it's just the kind of the heel tag main event style that they're going with at the moment. But yeah, it is. They seem like they're getting a lot of offense because of all the strikes and the cheating, 11 fouls in there. But they weren't hitting the strike downs, grapples, and dives that the face team were. And AEW's multi-man match style, their tag team match style, is a lot of hard-hitting offense. It's very fast, and there are a lot of big moves. And yeah, the Young Bucks kind of have implemented that style into AEW and then have stopped doing it, which is an interesting way of looking at it.
That's it's just an interesting perspective. This is why the stats, I think, are so interesting to me, because you do get this alternate way of looking at a match that you wouldn't normally, like, I'd never think of a match in terms of big offense versus, what I perceive to be a team dominating a match. But by being able to look at these numbers, I actually, in a lot of ways, I get a newfound respect for the Good Brothers and Matt Jackson, because they sell in the way that they do, and they each have such distinctive styles. Matt does a lot of these high spots, although he doesn't anymore now that they've turned heels. I mean, again, a match involving the Young Bucks, the team with the Bucks do fewer dives than their opponents, and that has become basically an every week occurrence for them, which I don't think gets enough credit for how much they've changed their style. And the Good Brothers, there's just something about them that really connects with me. I guess I don't know if it's the way they're booked or the way they wrestle, but something about them really connects. So, Dan, I'll ask you this before we move on to talking about Stardom. For the Young Bucks in particular, they have been involved in the greater elite versus everyone storyline. There hasn't seemed to be a lot of movement in terms of who's going to be the team that steps up and challenges them. So now that their characters, I think, are really established now, the way that they wrestle and the way that they're booked and what they're going to do, who would you have ultimately take the titles off of the Young Bucks? Who seems to make sense right now?
In terms of who takes the titles off them, I'm actually not sure. Because, as I said, I think personally I would move towards a big, proud and powerful win at that New York show. And I'm not sure there's enough time for them to build anyone else in the meantime to take that off the Bucks. So that feels like the answer at the moment. But I do wonder, obviously, the guy who I think really showed up, and I in terms of the sort of split of the statistics, I would assume that Penta was the one who got a lot of the offense in from their side. And I wonder if we're going to go back to Lucha Bros versus the Bucks in the short term when Phoenix is back and fit. That feels like, I mean, I don't think anyone would be upset with seeing that match again.
No.
And particularly with seeing it with full-on heel Bucks again, I think it would be sort of one of their sort of themed Wednesday night shows. I think that would be superb.
Well, you want to talk about one of the best matches in AEW? It was the what was it? The Stairway to Heaven match.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah, the ladder match between the Bucks and the Lucha Brothers. One of my favorite matches of all time. So revisiting that with the roles reversed, the Bucks as heels. I'll take that.
Exactly. So I think there's stuff you can do in between. There's obviously it becomes very complicated because they're thinking about 8 steps ahead of where we are. I think because we were already talking about Proud and Powerful versus FTR. They're obviously building that. So how do you then fit that into the storylines that are going on? It's they've got a lot to do. I feel like Proud and Powerful are the team to take it off them now that they've announced that New York show. That feels significant. And I mean, again, we have seen the teams face off against each other, but I think they've got a better match in them, those four. And And again, seeing it with that New York crowd behind Santana and Ortiz would be superb particularly against this heel Bucks as well, who will come out dressed in, well, I don't know who New York people hate particularly. New Jersey people, is that where they come out?
Boston. That's what they hate.
Yeah, come out in Red Sox jerseys, and that's I'm sure that's what they will, that sort of thing. So I think that's what I'd like to see. But I think there's a feud in the middle of that, which I think would be the Lucha Bros, which again would be superb.
Yeah, well, I mean, if your stopgap feud is potentially going to present us with some of the best matches we're going to see this year, that's a pretty solid deal from my perspective. Man, that's it's so funny to contrast the World Championship, where you have a challenger that is so obvious that even AEW is making reference to it when it comes to Hangman. And on his segment this week, they asked him about Kenny and his world title match, and so they in storyline, Hangman is the obvious challenger for Kenny Omega. So to contrast that with the Bucks, who don't have an obvious challenger right now, because I think they have like 4 or 5 that could potentially be the guys. I mean, you could have obviously the rematch with FTR. I think this is easily forgotten, but the Bucks versus FTR was like the dream match when FTR was the Revival in WWE. They made reference to it. They talked about it on Twitter. That was the dream match, and so they had to do it in front of no fans. And so now the prospect of bringing fans back, I've always said that they were going to rematch this in front of fans so that they could finally do this dream match in front of 15,000. And so that's on the horizon as well. And then also with the New York show, I totally agree. Having Proud and Powerful, we've known they're New Yorkers. They've talked about it in this segment on Dynamite. So there's a lot that you could do with the Bucks. So it's a really good problem to have, that you could book them against anyone, and it would end up being a really good match. Let's finally move on, and we'll talk about Stardom. Full disclosure, not an expert on Stardom. Don't watch it that much. So I'm going to be relying here on Craig and Dan to really help me out on this one. But this match in particular, title match, ends up a draw. Tommy versus Sayuri. Looking at the numbers on this, I mean, this is a fascinating glimpse into, first of all, Japanese-style wrestling, but also the characters of these two women and the way that this actually, the way the feud breaks down, the way the rivalry has looked, and the way that these two are presented on screen. I mean, this is a really, really interesting look into it. So, Craig, I will not try to talk about the intricacies of this story and everything, because I frankly just don't watch enough, unfortunately, to really know. But this match in particular was a fascinating look at the numbers. So if you could just kind of guide us through what we're looking at here, and what about this match was made it so talked about on social media.
Sorry, I hope the listeners don't mind. Maybe just quickly check with Dan how much longer he wants to go on this. I'm flagging quite a bit and wouldn't mind going to bed. This is really good radio. Dan, do you want to do like 5 minutes on this, or?
That sounds good. I think we can do that. No, I think we can do that.
Cool. Okie dokie. Next, right, okay. 43-minute match. It had a 30-minute time limit, so they got to the time limit. It was a draw, and then they had a big, like, I can keep going, can you not keep going, champion type thing. I think the match would have been better if it stopped at 30 minutes. I'm not as high on this match as other people. However, I do think you should get into Stardom. It's fantastic, and for me, it's filling a lot of the holes that New Japan isn't, since New Japan went to this kind of everything has to be 30 minutes at least and be the best match ever. A little bit NXT,
which has pushed me away from New Japan personally. The fact that that's been the philosophy.
Yeah, I haven't even watched that Will Ospreay Takagi match that's supposed to be one of the best ever, so I am struggling with it. Stardom isn't like that. The matches are not 43 minutes long. Generally, this is an anomaly. Lots of people are saying that it's like one of the best women's matches ever. It was too long for me. I really liked it up to the 30-minute match. I liked how it ended, the way it ended there. It was so desperate. and scrappy.
Yeah.
The first couple minutes when they came back was kind of the same, but I don't know. I just felt like they rehashed stuff after that, and then the double KO didn't feel as worthy as the time limit draw would have. All that being said, the numbers really do sell the kind of the efforts of both of the women. 0 fouls in this match. Yes, please. That's, let's get away from that kind of evil nonsense. Strikes Sayuri with the majority of the offense in the match, more big offense as well. She was really getting in the submissions. It's not in the graphic, but Itami with 10 submission holds, Sayuri with 20 different kind of submission holds in the entire match, which was, that's quite a lot. Interestingly, Sayuri is more keen to get the win. Look at the pin attempts, 19 compared to 8. Big difference there, obviously. Strike downs as well, Sayuri with 25 compared to 11. Sorry, Dan, were you cutting in?
Well, I was.
No, that wasn't me. No.
I wanted to point out the graph on this, because when you talk about the match should have ended at 30 and how desperate it got at the end, when you just look at the way this graph moves, you have right at the end both women spike at that 30-minute mark. And you do get to see visually how desperate they become to win.
That's when they come back, actually.
Because that first 3 minutes after they came back, it's just a slap fest, effectively, wasn't it? That was it, where they went full on sort of Nagata Suzuki sort of approach to them. Actually, that was the
27 to 30 is still a bit of a spike, though. It's like the third biggest spike in the match, just as it ended. And they did kind of batter each other, and then it fell off a cliff, as you can see thereafter. But that graph kind of reminds me of the one, Griff, that you were speaking about. Like it kind in one of the Okada Omega matches. It's
I was just going to bring up that comparison.
There you are. Okay, on you go.
No, well, but I totally agree with you. The reason why this is really effective, and over on our YouTube channel right now, Pro Wrestling Musings, we have a video talking about the Okada Omega rivalry, and one of the points that I make in that video that impresses me so much about that rivalry is when you look at the match offense graphs, they do often look like this. So cut off the last 12 minutes of this match. Just look from 0 to 30. Omega and Okada often look like this, that the graph, if you just take a cursory glance, it's disjointed. But when you look, you can see the way that it moves. The two respond to each other. There's things going on that the other woman has to counter. And so this is very similar, because when you look at, for example, the first 9 minutes, let's say, where Sayuri starts out hot, and she has a desire to win this match early on. She believes that she can get the upper hand. And so she starts out much hotter than Utami, but Utami at the same time, her line doesn't go down. It's not like she's losing offense. She's just not gaining it as fast, because she understands that she has to raise her level in order to keep up with what Sayuri is doing in this first 10 minutes. So she does that, and then Sayuri falls off. But Utami continues to do what she's doing. And so Sayuri's bouncing all around here because you can see that she's kind of working her way up to this moment where she's going to hit a finisher or whatever it is she's going to do, and she's going to get the pin. And then she works her way up to that point, and then she doesn't get the pin. And then Utami manages to stay constant. And then starting from like 14 minutes in all the way to the end, Utami's just building and building and building this whole time until they hit the crescendo. And Sayuri has to kind of work her way around this. So she builds up, gets the near fall, and then she goes back down. And now she's got to build up again. So it's this way of responding to each other that is so effective, because it's tactical. It's an actual tactical match that these two have to think about what they're doing. And it's, again, very similar to what Kenny Omega and Kazuchika Okada were doing in their series. And it just works so well for me because I'm such a nerd. And I love seeing the kind of tactical adjustments that need to be made during the course of a match. And that's exactly what you see here. Again, just cutting out that last 12 minutes, because that's not, I guess, technically part of the sanctioned match that we were seeing.
Dan, I wonder what do you see the purpose of this match? Like, it's ended up being such like such a significant match with the time it went. But like, what do you think? What do you think the purpose of this match was, with it being so long and then being a draw for Itami and Shuri? Sorry, I think it's Shuri.
Oh, is it?
Wrong.
Have I been mispronouncing that whole time?
I think I started it and you copied me. I was like, I said it wrong.
That's awkward. My bad.
I think what the main purpose was, it was giving Stardom this match of this quality to get them sort of noticed. It felt like a match from the off that was going out to be on that sort of 5-star level, whoever you take your 5-star ratings from. And just said, for me, this is my match of the year so far. That I enjoyed it from start to finish, even including that final 13 minutes. And I actually liked the fact that they restarted it. Part of the reason being that one of the criticisms of Stardom recently has been there's been quite a lot of time limit draws. They're sort of putting a lot of these big people together and then not delivering a finish. And I think as much as they didn't deliver a finish here either, it was a different type of, rather than not having the time limit draw, the fact they just battered each other to the extent they couldn't stand up, I think was a good way of doing something different. And remarkably, considering how good this match is, allowing for another match at some point. That's I don't know if that will happen soon. Whether I think there are more people to come to challenge Utami, but I personally, I think this was Stardom's attempt to put themselves on the same level as New Japan in terms of that match quality, and I think they both absolutely delivered in this. I think that the style of match was superb. The first sort of 5-10 minutes was so technical. It wasn't dissimilar to the start of that MMA match we were talking about earlier. It was really sort of technical wrestling, and then it just became horribly dangerous basically from there on in. Some of the spots were incredible, and yeah, I don't quite know where they go from that with this story, but I'm just really pleased that Stardom have been able to put on a match like this, and it's getting so much attention. Mm-hmm. Because as Craig said, I think it's a superb promotion. It's well worth watching. When people talk about Impact or AEW or WWE being the best women's division, you only have to watch sort of a couple of minutes of Stardom to realise it's not in the same league in terms of the in-ring stuff, at least.
100%. Yeah.
Even I know that as someone who really doesn't watch that much, but the little that I have watched, I mean, you can tell that they're operating on a different level. It feels very 2017 New Japan. They have lots and lots of world-class wrestlers, and they basically just mash them together, and they say, you know what? You just go out there and have your match, and so sometimes you do get draws, and sometimes you get screwy finishes and all kinds of stuff like that. That's kind of a byproduct of having this many stars. But 2017 New Japan is arguably some of the best wrestling you'll ever find anywhere, and this feels like they're going sort of in that direction in terms of the way that they structure their matches and what they want their wrestlers to do. That's from an outside perspective.
Yeah, and what they've done very well is because they had an Okada-style champion in Mayu Iwatani, and where New Japan have not, in my opinion, not really solved the issue of not having Okada as champion. They've transitioned it on to Utami, and she is just going from strength to strength. And this match was almost like the pinnacle of that. And they were both as good as each other in this. Arguably, Syuri was sort of the more impressive performer. I don't think there's anyone in world wrestling, regardless of gender, I'd like to be kicked by less than Syuri. It's a terrifying noise that she makes when she kicks people. But yeah, they've done so well in transitioning from like their ace character onto someone else and making that person feel just as important, which I think is a very hard thing to do, and something that someone like AEW will come up against. What they will come up against, I think, at some point when they have. Well, I suppose they tried to do the same thing with with Hikaru Shida, but she never quite had that same ace feeling. I don't think that that someone like Mayu Iwatani had. So yeah, it's as I say, it's great to see them getting that attention and I think it was a match that thoroughly deserved it.
If somebody was intimidated by the length of this, and I could totally understand, there was the All-Star Cinderella earlier this year, where they headlined with Julia versus Tam. I'd suggest that that's perhaps a slightly more digestible match. Like the first time I watched Okada and Omega, before I'd really fully gotten into that kind of intense wrestling, I just couldn't. It was it was too much. I couldn't engage with it. So this is maybe a little bit like that, but the Julia Tam match, the hair versus hair match is perhaps easier to digest. In fact, any match from that show that I can't remember what it was called.
That was a superb card from start to finish. And you said earlier what was the ultimate goal behind this match.
Mm-hmm.
Part of it, I think, was raising the profile of that red belt. Back to the top. Because actually, they've had a couple of pay-per-views, or what they consider pay-per-views in a row, where other things have headlined, such as the Tam Julia match. Whereas this really,
Julia has headlined.
Yeah, exactly. So I think this puts that belt back to the top of the card, and it'll be really interesting to see where they go with that.
I think it goes back to the New Japan comparisons that you were making, because it was right around when Okada he went from, he wasn't called, literally Tanahashi's nickname was the Ace. So Okada, he went from top star to like the superstar that they have, their guy. And it was around that time that the Intercontinental Championship was actually the big draw for New Japan. It headlined a Wrestle Kingdom. So Nakamura made it that, and then they had to give the belt to Okada in order for the World Championship to once again feel like the biggest belt they had, and Okada did what he did. So it just goes back into mirroring that mid-2010s New Japan feel that it seems like Stardom is kind of going for in a lot of ways.
Which and it makes a lot of sense. With certainly not the time to go into the business side of it, but obviously with Bushiroad being involved, who are the New Japan guys, that it's a similar approach, I think. I think
English commentary.
That was interesting,
well.
actually.
The
first time I think, it actually was good. So I was expecting it to be terrible. Because I've heard when you normally have the first. First English commentary on any of these things, it's normally fairly awful. But actually, the two, I don't know who they were, but the two guys involved were very knowledgeable about it, very good.
Fulton, I believe, is the Noah guy.
Right, okay. Yeah, I thought that was really good. And it's something that, weirdly, with Stardom, they don't have commentary generally, let alone English commentary. So it was a very different watching experience in that sense. But hopefully it carries on, because I think it does add that element of interest, and again makes it feel like the other things that we watch, which is I think is promising for the Western viewer at least.
I think if you want Stardom to be appealing to a wider Western audience, you do have to have commentary. It's just one of those things that we're used to seeing. It's probably a cultural difference, the difference between WWE and Crockett Promotions / WCW and all that stuff. Always had commentary. It was just part of the deal, at least here in America. That was just part of what you did. I think commentary is necessary to appeal to a broader Western audience. So if it's high quality, then that just is kind of another tick in that box. Again, to go back to the New Japan comparisons, that kind of 2010s where it started to become much more popular to a broader Western audience. Part of that was Kevin Kelly really coming into his own as a commentator and becoming the voice of New Japan.
And because there are some bad English commentaries, I think, from the early stages of New Japan, where I don't know who it was they had involved, but you're absolutely right. When you get the right people involved, people who know the business of the actual promotion they're working on, but also are experienced in commentary, it enhances everything, certainly from my perspective.
People who can explain that culture to someone coming in new, like myself, who needed that kind of culture explained to me about how it works and what it's all about. And that's where Kevin Kelly, I think, really excels. So if Stardom is able to get that level of commentator to help explain the culture to people who have not seen it before, that is a huge advantage as well.
Yeah, completely agree. Yeah.
Background and all that. Yeah, absolutely.
So it sounds like Craig. We should give him a little Father's Day present here and let him go to bed. after 2.5 hours of talking wrestling. So if you have made it through, thank you so much for listening to this. It was a great time, as it always is. And so without further ado, of course, you guys both know the drill. Craig, please tell the people where they can find you.
You can find me at Craig PW Musings on Twitter. Please go and check out the website this week. We've put up 7 articles about Kenny Omega and Kazuchika Okada. There's 6 of us in total that have written those. And then that'll probably... And then head over to the YouTube channel, check out Griff. I'm very tired. I drink too much coffee, so I end up crashing by the end of the day. Griff did a wonderful video based on that too. Very professional, looks really cool. Please check that out. And you can find Dan at...
I'm at Wrestling Rhymes, and my main thing at the moment is managing the levels of disqualifications between WWE and AEW. Just for those, this is ahead of
who has the most?
Well, just this is ahead of Hell in a Cell, so no, but it's a close run thing. But as we go on to the 6-month mark, it's 44-2 in favor of WWE at the moment.
So I just want to make it clear, though, is that 2 disqualifications in all of AEW, like the history of the promotion they've done it?
This is in 2021, but actually I think even if you do include the whole history of it, it doesn't go up to double figures. And that's including Dark and Dark Elevation as well.
Which have a million matches on each one.
Yeah, exactly. You're talking about like 24 matches a week for AEW.
Yeah. So I'm excited to see how in a pay-per-view which is based around no disqualification, WWE are going to add to that tally tonight. We'll see in the morning.
That's a good point. So yeah, both these guys are great follows on Twitter, and do check out our YouTube channel. Craig was very kind, but whether or not you actually like my voice or not, there's some really great information fueled by some of the best wrestling writers in the world that we have over at ProWrestlingMusings.com. So we have lots to talk about Omega and Okada. We've got more stuff coming about that particular rivalry. So that is over on our YouTube channel, Pro Wrestling Musings. If you're not already there, if you're not, then obviously leave us a 5-star review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. I mean, you know the drill. You know what people tell you to do all the time. So just do that for us. And you can see me on my personal YouTube channel over at General Admission Wrestling. So thank you all so much for joining us. We will be back to talk more Dynamite as we have a special Saturday edition featuring a World Championship match. I believe that's coming up next Saturday, so you will not want to miss any of that. So we'll see you then on the Pro Wrestling Musings podcast. We appreciate your time.